Chapter 710. Ever since he came to the Ramsey Plain, Keyes had been using the scale of perpetual order as his trademark. However, other than doing some no-cost business at sea, he had not started any serious business. There was no other reason. Firstly, it was because the Emperor's sudden awakening had directly disrupted his plan to deal with the god on Dwarf Island. Secondly, there was indeed no profitable business in the Ramsey Plain. Any businessman with a slightly sane mind would not use real goods to deal with glass shards like jewel coins. However, after the Alliance army attacked the bandit groups that were swarming in various places, Keyes actually found a big business opportunity. And the origin of this business opportunity was how to deal with the members of the bandit group. This was a troublesome matter for the rulers of various cities. Directly killing them, as many cities belonged to the parishes of the good gods, the priests on duty in the temples would not agree to it. Putting the bandit group members in prison would undoubtedly mean that they would have to take care of a large group of people's daily necessities. Given the current wartime situation, it would be an unnecessary burden to their own cities. And throwing these people into the death squads to fight against the monster army, after the previous experiment in Soft Maple City, Grimm directly rejected this idea. Because not only would it not be of any use, it might even strengthen the monster army. Therefore, after crushing the soft persimmons of the bandit groups, the city managers were surprised to find that they had a lot of soft persimmons hanging on their hands. Fortunately, Keyes was generous and was willing to help them solve the problem. There is no need to talk about any benefits with the bandit. All the bandits caught can be sold to the scale of perpetual order. Our Chamber of Commerce has several large plantations overseas, as well as 2 or 3 mines that need manpower to mine. As long as they are there, these people will have to work honestly to atone for their previous actions. And most importantly, they will not strengthen the Emperor's army. Keyes' solution was no different from giving a pillow when they were sleepy to the mayors of various cities. In addition, the purchase price was very reasonable. The Scales of Eternity Chamber of Commerce was willing to pay 2 cat's eye emerald coins for each member of the bandit group. They didn't hesitate at all. On the day the plan was proposed, they all accepted the conditions given by Quest. As for where those bandits would be sent to, although Keyes did not have plantations or mines in the Ramsey Plain, he had many places that lacked free labor in other plains. In the Ashes world, he had a complete Pasha territory in the Medici Empire and the Wusa Empire, which had a talent market in Jiangjin. In the island world, he controlled all the rights of the Camel Empire. Moreover, the current members of these bandit groups might not be able to get such a good treatment as free labor. After all, compared to the basic plates that had been in operation for a long time, the 10,000 herb hall and the Wheel of Fortune in Mark City actually lacked some raw materials. Whether it was used as a cultivation medium for certain herbs, as a participant in a life and death battle, or as a member of a bandit gang who had committed many crimes, they were actually more suitable. In any case, he had used the glass shards to exchange for it. The advantage was that it was cheap enough. Therefore, after Keyes opened up the purchase, the captured bandits were all escorted by the Alliance army to the goods trading center specially set up by the Scale of Perpetual Order. At night, when there was no one around, the half-lich Snade would use the door key he took out from Mark City to open a portal to another world that led to Gate City and transport all the goods to the Wheel of Fortune. This kind of transaction lasted for a week, and the backlog of bandit members in the prisons of various cities was almost emptied. As a last resort, Keyes had to ask Green for permission to let his subordinates personally go and capture those small bandit group. Of course, the targets he chose were those strong and notorious bandit. This was because in the life and death battle arena of the Wheel of Fortune, only those who were fierce and evil enough could attract more customers' interest. Due to the abundant manpower, there was an unlimited supply of participants in the arena every day. The amount of bets placed on the Wheel of Fortune's life and death battle arena could be said to be rising steadily. Even the android Shimshaka, who was in charge of this business, was greatly surprised. Now, she did not even need Sneyd to open the door. Every fixed time, she would personally go to the Wheel of Fortune and come to the Ramsey Plain. The underworld queen of Mark City had to select some fighters in advance, and the remaining leftovers would be transported to the Thousand Herb Hall to be used as a flower garden to cultivate some evil herbs. Why are these people all scalded? Looking at the latest batch of goods that were brought in, Shimshaka and 2 Nekaro's demon bodyguards kept picking and choosing. Can't those orcs be more careful and use less scorching metal magic scrolls? Of course, her words were just her own private criticism. She, who had inherited the character of the original Yuggro's demon, adhered to all the habits of the original Shimshaka. Unless there was no other choice, she had always been expressionless. After picking for a while, she ordered her 2 bodyguards to carry the selected goods to the Wheel of Fortune, while she walked slowly to a tent. Keyes summoned her today to ask her some questions. "My lord." Seeing Keyes, the underworld queen bowed in a prostrating position. "May I ask if there's anything you want me to do?" The young blue dragon, sitting in the middle of the tent, was holding a letter and thinking about something. Hearing her words, Keyes directly asked, "How's the contact with the new president of the Gods and Non-Gods Association? Is he still in the honeymoon period with us?" Shimshaka thought for a while and replied, "It's only been a month since the disappearance of the previous president. He's now busy appeasing the various forces in the Gods and Non-Gods Association, so he's not in frequent contact with us. But because we have something on him, if we want him to do something now, he should agree. I want him to help me pass on a message about Stim." Keyes finally said his thoughts. The contents of the letter he had just read were the latest information from Dwarf Island, which Green had told him. After a period of intense preparation, Dwarf Island now officially announced that they would send combat troops to join the Ramsey Human Alliance. They were going to fight the Emperor with real swords and guns. Keyes felt that his plan could now be carried out. Chapter 711. When Keyes returned to Emeraldwood City, the autumn rain was falling. He was riding on a winter wolf, while the desert elf Brock was riding on a jujube-colored warhorse. A mule followed behind them. The mule was carrying Keyes's letter and Brock's armor, their bedding, tents, clothes, a lot of hard spiced beef strips, half a jug of honey wine, and 2 leather bags of water. When they reached the gate of Emeraldwood City, they reined in their horses. There was a human head stuck in the anchor on the gate. It seemed that the head had been stuck there not long ago. The flesh was more pink than green, but it had already attracted a flock of scavenger crows. The lips and cheeks of the deceased were torn and bitten. His eyes had become 2 brown holes. Red tears slowly flowed out through the dried blood scabs. His mouth was drooping, and his mouth was wide open. He seemed to be preaching to the travelers under the gate. Keyes squinted his eyes and looked at him. "I seem to know this man." He looked back at Brock. "This man seems to be the leader of the rebels, Rake. I think I still have a promise to him." "My lord has been gone for some time. The situation in the city has changed recently," Brock said. "Last week, this man preached in front of the city gate and criticized the dwarves for fooling all the Ramseys with the financial system. He said those dwarves are not good allies." "Green ordered him to be executed?" Quess asked. "This doesn't seem to be the style of the governor of Emeraldwood City. Rake's teeth are all black. It's obvious that he died of poisoning. It's not honorable, and it's easy to incite a riot among the rebels." "It was the fat mayor of Soft Maple Town who did it," Brock added. "He wanted to send his mercenaries to capture Rake, but they didn't succeed. Those people took a step back and forced a bowl of poison into his mouth." After a short pause, Keyes and Brock urged their mounts into Emeraldwood City. Along the way, the desert elf explained to him in detail about the grudge between Rake and the fat mayor of Soft Maple City. These stories had already spread throughout the city like the wind. The two of them used to be apprentices in the shop of a great alchemist in soft Maple City. The only difference was that the fat mayor was smarter, while Rake was more obsessed with alchemy. The former relied on the previous mayor's tonic and stepped into the political arena. The latter learned all the skills of the great alchemist and inherited his teacher's family business. Harrow had always believed that the gemstone coins given out by the dwarves were not valuable at all, and that the dwarf island wanted to use them to enslave and order the humans of Ramsey around. Therefore, the fat mayor announced that his junior was a rebel, and Rake escaped to the outskirts of the city to become a rebel. Later on, he relied on his own abilities to slowly become a leader of the rebel army. After Dwarf Island expressed their desire to join the alliance, Rake, who was already a part of the alliance, jumped out and criticized the actions of the dwarves. Thus, the fat mayor naturally carried out an assassination attempt on him. After Rake's death, although Grimm was very angry with the behavior of the mayor, because this behavior actually tore open an irreparable gap in the carefully assembled Ramsey-human alliance. However, due to the pressure from the Dwarf Island, he had to comply with the opinion of the dwarves and display Rake's head in front of the city gate. Before, Keyes had been busy doing business, so he only left the desert elf and the sacred samurai in Emeraldwood City to deal with some daily affairs. When the incident happened, Brock directly used a magic scroll to teleport to the camp of the Scale of Perpetual Order. Jason, on the other hand, stayed with the sacred samurai of Hieronymus. Little Dalton was the captain, according to the plan. Since the dwarves had sent a large number of people to Emeraldwood City, Keyes did not use any unusual means to hide his identity. Like an ordinary person, he urged his mount to rush back to Emeraldwood City under the starry night. Just by strolling in the streets of the city, Keyes seemed to be able to smell the smell of gunpowder in the air. The civilians of Emeraldwood City all showed a hidden hostility toward the new dwarves. This was related to the dwarves' interference in the traditions of Emeraldwood City and their support of the assassination of the exiled mayor of Maple City. But more importantly, it was because after entering the city, they directly occupied the street that was destroyed by the Emperor's air raid without saying anything. Then, the dwarves openly built a city within the city that prohibited ordinary civilians of Emeraldwood City from entering. It was not strange that the civilians of Emeraldwood City would have such a reaction. Just think about it, in the face of an evil guest who suddenly broke into his house, and then came out to live in a separate room without the owner's permission, which owner would give him any face? In fact, besides the ordinary civilians, Mayor Grimm was also mad at the behavior of the dwarves. His family had been rooted in this place and had ruled Emeraldwood City for hundreds of years. And now, he was the nominal commander-in-chief of the entire Ramsey-Human alliance. The dwarves built a city here without permission, which was a naked provocation to his authority. If it were not for his attendants and the Templar Tom beside him who repeatedly told him how advanced the weapons and equipment brought by the dwarves were, that falling out with them was tantamount to provoking an enemy as terrible as the Emperor, and that the future hope of the Ramsey people all depended on him enduring the humiliation at this moment, he would have already ordered to storm the city within the city. However, just as those people had said, the dwarves had indeed come prepared this time. They directly used a large airship to drop a large number of weapons and infrastructure equipment into the ruins of the city. The dwarf commander who arrived first was the dwarf elder who had the nickname of the Dwarf of Dwarfs, Freya Ironbeard. This dwarf began construction as soon as his feet touched the ground. He had 5 mechanical chocobo cavalry units equipped with steam tanks disperse the nearby civilians of Emeraldwood City. Then, he led his engineers and construction experts to use forklifts and other tools to pour all the rubble in the ruins into a compressed plank manufacturing machine. Then, they used cranes and other tools to stack the compressed planks layer by layer like building blocks, building a fortress with an obvious pygmy style. Using this building as a base, Freya Ironbeard built some underground fortifications that could only be used by the gnomes. To be honest, his actions could be said to be very efficient. The engineers under him were also a rare group of dwarves who were not so lazy on Dwarf Island. However, this dwarf with a steel-like beard overlooked a problem, or rather, he did not care at all, and that was that the place they chose to build was not an ownerless land. Chapter 7:12. The Green family's mansion was located in the center of Emerald City. It was built by the grandfather of the current mayor 40 years ago. By the standards of a castle, it was almost brand new. It was nicknamed the Milk House by the people because its walls, fortress, and tower were all made of high-quality white stone. The stone was picked from the valley and transported over the mountains with great difficulty. The floor and pillars of the mansion were made of milky white marble with golden veins. The ceiling beams were made of bone-white weirwood. It looked magnificent and cost a lot of money to build. However, the mansion was no longer in the limelight. Or rather, it had been pushed away from the center of the stage. The gnomes had built the Grey Tower fortress using rubble and rubble right next to the Milk House. The lead-colored tower-like building was more than 3 times the height of the tallest tower in the Green family mansion. 2 dwarf airships were moored at the top. Every time the sun rose, the Grey Tower was like a sharp needle erected in the center of a sundial. The first thing it would do was cast a shadow on the Milk House. After 4 or 5 hourglasses, the shadow would slowly move away. Of course, the current head of the Milk House, the current mayor of Emerald City, and the commander-in-chief of the Alliance Army, Green, was so angry that he couldn't eat for many days. "Has Sir Keys returned? Have you received any news from the pigeon?" Sitting on the chair pointed out by the opaline, Grim asked his attendant loudly. His tone was full of anxiety. Because the scale of perpetual order didn't have a priest, and Emerald City didn't have a mage who could transmit messages over long distances, he and Keys could only rely on the more primitive pigeon transmission. Green was a little impatient now. The reason was none other than the dwarves. 3 days ago, Freya Ironbeard privately sent a message to all the mayors of Ramsey. He wanted to invite them to come and participate in a night tournament. The so-called night tournament was actually a tradition of Ramsey's. It was born out of ancient ritual warfare. Through the tournament, the Ramsey people could choose a leader who was skilled in martial arts to lead them to challenge the emperor. However, the Alliance army had already elected a commander-in-chief. Even though the dwarf elder with a face full of steel manies didn't say it out loud, this action itself was a challenge to Grimm's authority. However, according to the traditions of the Ramsey people, the leaders of the city-states could not refuse this invitation. What's more, other than Grimm's hardcore allies, the entire alliance wasn't a monolithic block. Therefore, almost all the mayors agreed to come. Yesterday morning, Grey Tower had sent more than 10 dwarf helicopters to various human city-states to pick up the mayors and knights who had come to participate in the competition. Although Green was quite confident in his own martial arts skills, after all, in order to become the head of the Green family, he had hunted down a mountain giant alone before his coming-of-age ceremony. Those who came to participate in the tournament were not only the brainless mayors. They had the right to let their loyal knights take their place and compete for the championship. Even the exiled mayor of Soft Maple City had conferred the title of a knight to the head of the mercenary group under his command. He expressed that he wanted him to be the representative to fight for honor for himself and for the reputation of Soft Maple City. But if he were to fight against the experienced killer, Grimm's chances of victory would only be 50-50. That was why he needed to look for reinforcements. The first thing he thought of was Keys, the scale of perpetual order. Although this Chamber of Commerce had first contacted the fat mayor of Soft Maple City, many of the subsequent collaborations were actually led by Grimm. Grimm had a clear understanding of the power of the scale of perpetual order, including the strength of the guards of the Chamber of Commerce. He knew that Keys' men were very strong. Any one of them could beat up a large number of so-called knights. Moreover, according to the tradition of the Ramsey people, the finale of the night tournament was a group battle of 7 against 7. In order to win this tournament, which was completely aimed at himself, Grimm felt that he must draw Keyes to his side. At the very least, he had to think of a way to persuade Keyes to not let the guards of the scale of perpetual order become other people's knights. Otherwise, if he wanted to keep the throne of the Alliance Army's commander-in-chief, he felt that it might be a bit difficult. Sir Keyes has arrived." An attendant trotted in. Because he knew the mood of the master, he did not follow the etiquette rules and directly ran while announcing the news loudly. When Keyes walked into the milkhouse's hall, it had already become a qualified private banquet hall. Roasted suckling pigs decorated with apples, roasted peacocks with their feathers, and roasted barracuda sprinkled with crushed almonds were placed on the high table. Peppered pork soaked in almond milk, fried chicken stuffed with onions, mushrooms and roasted chestnuts, as well as codfish steaks with sweet and sour sauce were piled up tightly on the side table. In addition, there was pea porridge, buttered turnips, white radishes dipped in honey, and a strong taste of blue ripened cheese. These foods showed the hospitality and wealth of the host. Keyes did not refuse and sat at the head of the table. After toasting with Mayor Grimm, he happily ate and chewed. The flute and violin played cheerful music. When Keyes began to drink the pea porridge, the musicians tactfully ended the performance. The topic of the banquet naturally shifted to the night tournament that was going to take place the next day. "I hope you can give me a hand, or at least give me a promise," Grimm slowly said. "For the sake of this should be considered a sumptuous welcome banquet, don't become another mayor's substitute knight." Picking up a corner of ale, Keyes drank it in one gulp. "Never refuse the master who gives you the best honey-mixed wine," he replied Grimm with a Ramsey proverb. "If a knight wants to obtain glory, it is not about martial arts or armor, but about choosing the right lord." Seeing the joy in Grimm's eyes, he continued to add, "The dwarf's current actions are not in line with the core values passed down from the scale of perpetual order. Our goal has always been to solve the big problem of the Emperor, but now they are dividing the Ramsey army that has been united with great difficulty. They are still too naive. Dividing and suppressing the Ramseys will not end well in the end, unless the financial system that the dwarfs came up with is also effective against the Emperor. Otherwise, their current actions are tantamount to slow suicide. They are really stupid beyond belief. Finally, I met a sensible person. The money spent on this meal was not in vain." Grimm's heart was also extremely excited. Chapter 7:13. On the morning of the second day, the scorching sun was merciless. It didn't look like autumn at all. The white stones of the milk house were roasted into waves of heat. The air was filled with the smell of dried soil and trampled grass. There was not a single breeze to stir the green, white, and yellow flags hanging low on the main castle and the gatehouse. The night attendants in the beast pen were already busy. They had started washing the mounts of their respective knights early in the morning. In addition to the hot weather, many of the horses seemed to have sensed the atmosphere of the day, and their hearts were filled with anger. When the attendants tightened the bellies of the horses, the war horses shook their heads to resist. They even showed their huge square molars or snorted at the people who were familiar with them in the past. The railings of the arena had been erected next to the gray tower built by the dwarves. 3 levels of wooden stands were erected beside the wall. The highest level was a box built by the midget. It was used for the distinguished guests from the dwarf island, as well as the mayors who were going to fight on behalf of the knights, to sit on the shady cushioned seats and watch the knights fight. There were many tents on both sides of the arena. The knights would wear their armor there. Spare wooden spears were also placed next to the railings for the knights to use. Unlike in the past, the dwarves allowed the civilians of Emeraldwood City to come and watch the competition during the night's competition. Therefore, on the open space next to the arena, there were now many people gathered to watch the fun. There were also peddlers doing business. Some vaudeville troupes were also performing here. Some were throwing torches, some were doing somersaults in the air. There were also bards who chose to sing here. They sang The Black Bear and The Beautiful Young Woman, and other slang songs. Many citizens also beat the beat to liven things up. When the song reached the climax, many people shouted, "This black bear! Black bear! Its whole body is dark brown and covered with fur." Bang, bang, bang! 3 salutes sounded, announcing the official start of the competition. The first to come down was a team of riders who were responsible for warming up the arena. One side held a kite shield with a red and white square coat of arms, and the other side held a round shield with the coat of arms of the 2 towers. The 14 people were divided into 2 groups. Following the sound of the firecrackers, they immediately charged towards each other from both ends of the arena. The 2 horses crossed each other, but no one fell off their horses. However, the long spears that came into contact with each other's shields were broken and shattered, making crackling sounds like firecrackers. There was a burst of cheers from the stands. The soldiers on duty beside the arena also shouted a few times, but the overall sound was sparse, short, and empty. After all, this was just an opening contest to liven things up, and the participants were merely the honor riders of 2 small cities. The real highlight was yet to come. Freya Ironbeard walked to the highest level of the viewing platform, where there was a trumpet-like technological creation. He looked around at the bustling civilians of Emerald City, and then at the mayors of the Ramsey city-states who had already taken their seats in the viewing platform. In a voice that was so low that it did not sound like a dwarf's, Freya Ironbeard slowly said, "The warm-up is over. The night competition officially begins." The loudspeaker made of electromagnetic coils amplified his voice many times. No matter where one was in Greenwood City, one could hear the dwarf elder's announcement. The knights who had been waiting in the tents for a long time were all rubbing their hands, ready to show off their skills. The whole morning's competition was prepared for the substitute knights brought by the mayors. They would replace their lords in the afternoon's team battle. But now, they needed to prove their bravery by challenging the mechanical chocobo cavalry of Dwarf Island. If they could not win, then unless their lords personally participated in the afternoon, the city they represented would be directly disqualified. And in that case, the city they represented would become a laughingstock in the eyes of the Ramsey people. Originally, Green had made up his mind to participate in the competition himself from the beginning. He did not need to send substitute knights to participate in the morning's competition. But Keyes felt that it would be a little boring, and at the same time, it would not be able to intimidate the arrogant dwarf, so Green still sent 2 knights to participate in the morning's competition. Because of Keyes's strong recommendation, the candidate was a warrior named Goliath. Goliath seemed to be a little excited as he stroked his mount. Hard work always pays off. He pinched the tip of the nose of his mastodon companion, whom he named Tango. "I told you the cuz would reward me with a good mount." Tango could not help but feel a little annoyed when someone pinched the tip of his nose. But thinking of the Lord's warning, he still obediently kept quiet, appearing to be more or less resigned to the situation. As a behemoth twice the size of an ordinary elephant and 4 times the weight, he had his own pride. In the past, his huge tusks swept through everything until he met a monster like that. The one who tamed him was the ogre Neru, who had nothing to do in the mountain forest with his brother Brew. He hunted mountain giants for fun. Because he did not have to worry about being seen, Neru directly removed the spell on his body in the forest and returned to his original form. As a rare ogre with the atavistic bloodline, Neru's body was so strong that he did not look like an ogre. Ordinary mountain giants, when standing up straight, could only reach his belly. Perhaps only storm giants, rune giants, and other higher giants were qualified to compete with him in size and body. While wandering in the forest, Neru happened to find Tango and his family, so the ogre directly persuaded them to become his pets through physical means. When he learned yesterday that Keys wanted to find a mount for Shattered Barehead, Nehru generously lent Tango to the Goliath warrior captain to ensure that he would have a suitable mount. After being warned by Nehru, Tango was obediently brought to a tent. Tango had been trying his best to keep quiet and cooperate with Keys, preparing to give the knights a surprise today. Because of the size of Tango's body, ordinary servants could not put on a saddle for him, but Shattered Barehead had no objection to taking care of the mount himself. However, if it was not for Nehru, Tango actually did not like to have a little person beside him, even if he used a brush to scrub it. The feeling was actually not bad. However, the ignorant mastodon did not expect that after the little person rode him out of the tent, he would see many little people that were even smaller than him. The opponent standing in front of him was actually a little person that was even smaller than the little person. How interesting! The Tango raised its nose and roared. Then, its 4 hooves stomped on the solid ground and rushed towards the little person, who was in a panic. Chapter 7:14. What kind of monster is that? Many mayors, representatives from Ramses' major chambers of commerce, as well as a few elders from Dwarf Island, exclaimed in unison when they saw the figure in the arena. Many of the citizens of Emeraldwood City who were watching from outside the arena saw the flag tied to the mastodon's back, and couldn't help but stretch their necks to cheer for the big guy who appeared in the arena. Feeling the inquisitive gazes from the mayors who were familiar with him, Grim felt very comfortable. The next one is my substitute knight. He's a Goliath warrior called Bear-Crushing Head, which means the man who smashed the head of a brown bear with one punch. At this moment, Goliath, who could smash a brown bear's head with a single punch, was holding a much elongated spear in his hand, aiming at the dwarf mechanical chocobo rider that was here to test the quality of the substitute knights, and was ready to charge. The opponent was scared out of his wits. In order to continue the tradition of the ancient times, he sat in the cockpit of the mechanical chocobo without any kinetic weapons. Just like the substitute knight, he held a wooden spear used for sparring, and it wasn't even the elongated kind. As a terrifying giant beast, the mastodon had 2 huge tusks, and with the elongated spear in the hands of the bulky knight on its back, there were a total of 3 spears aimed at him, blocking his way up, down, left, and right. He couldn't help but wonder if his weapon could even touch the opponent. What's more, he felt that if he successfully stabbed the weapon into the giant beast's body, the mastodon would feel the pain and go crazy. At that time, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if he had confidence in the speed of the mechanical chocobo, if there was a problem with one of the parts, he would be trampled into a pile of mud under the beast's hooves. This was really bad, twice as anxious. The dwarf mechanical chocobo rider secretly wondered if he should follow the storybooks, nonsense, and throw out his white underwear to show that he was friendly. However, he didn't have the space. The cockpit wasn't spacious enough, nor did he have the time. After adjusting the angle of his lance, Smasher Bear's head drove the Tango towards his target. At this moment, everyone sitting in the spectator stands at the edge of the arena was a witness. Amidst the rumbling noise, amidst the dusty arena, they were here to witness the big guy, the symbol of Mayor Grimm's authority in Emeraldwood City, crushing his opponent in front of him, leaving behind a ground littered with broken parts of the chocobo. Bang! Kacha! Ong! The dull sound of the collision, the sound of the wooden lance breaking, and the furious roar of the mastodon. The 3 sounds combined into one sound, and suddenly resounded throughout the entire arena. Almost all the substitute knights who were waiting to go on stage opened their tents and looked around. When the dust settled, the imaginary scene of body parts scattered all over the ground and flesh flying everywhere did not appear. Green had already prepared a draft of "Accidental killing is common in martial arts competitions, restrain your grief," and so on, but he did not have time to say it. That was because the dwarf mechanical chocobo rider was still standing in the middle of the arena, as if nothing had happened. Smasher Bear's head, who was riding the mastodon, was struggling to pull on the reins of his mount, controlling the tango from going crazy. In the process of charging just now, the lance and tusks had clearly pierced through the mechanical chocobo, but Goliath and his mount didn't touch the actual target at all. What was left behind was only an illusion. Unable to control the momentum in time, the tango crashed through the railing and crashed into the wall of the gray tower. One of the thick tusks it had always been proud of was broken. If not for Smasher Bear's head restraining it, the tango would have already charged towards the spectating commoners. Elder Freya, Grimm's expression was gloomy, looking at the dwarf island representative sitting beside him. Since when were the contestants allowed to use illusion spells in the night tournament? Is this also a tradition? The dwarf elder smiled, answering neither quickly nor slowly. Tradition must be upheld, but innovation must also be maintained. This is the teaching of the master craftsman. Moreover, in the ancient night tournament, Goliaths and war elephants would not appear either, right? Freya Ironbeard's words made Grimm speechless for a moment. The mayor of Emeraldwood City turned his head to look at Quess, who was sitting on the side, but found that the person in charge of the scales of Eternity Chamber of Commerce didn't have any intense reaction. He just sat there calmly and looked at the arena. Quess had already expected that the gnome horseman could use illusions. He even knew that the mechanical chocobo he was riding had more tricks up its sleeve. So he didn't let Smasher Bear's head ride a normal mastodon into the arena. That's right, he had done something to the mastodon beforehand. And this kind of operation, to him, was actually very simple. Keys just put some Leviathan cells into the food it ate in advance. After a series of internal and external modifications, the tango now was definitely not a normal animal, but a Leviathan with extraordinary intelligence. Based on the enemy's target, it could make all kinds of adjustments in time. Roar! The tango raised its nose, letting out a loud roar. Then, mist suddenly sprayed out from its nostrils, covering almost half of the arena. Affected by the mist, the mechanical chocobo immediately showed strobe-like fluctuations. Obviously, this was another illusion trick created by magic. And the real mechanical chocobo quietly revealed itself beside the mastodon. The dwarf rider sitting in the cockpit was now like a child who had sneaked into the kitchen to eat in the middle of the night, caught red-handed. He awkwardly threw the wooden lance in his hand to the ground, and then decisively pressed the red button on the control panel. Whoosh! The mechanical chocobo's two legs were like fully charged springs, carrying the rider on its back and quickly flying backward. As he retreated, the dwarf rider took out his crossbow and shot tranquilizer darts at the mastodon. Facing the incoming tranquilizer darts, the mastodon tango stomped heavily on the ground, and an earthen wall immediately appeared in front of the giant beast. Ding! The tranquilizer darts were all nailed into the earthen wall. The dwarf rider controlled the mechanical chocobo to stop. He wanted to observe the opponent's situation. But at this moment the sound of a long whip breaking through the air suddenly appeared behind him. Chapter 7:15. In an unimaginable way, the gigantic mastodon tango appeared behind the midget mechanical chocobo, then raised its trunk and gave the guy a fierce blow. Bang! Accompanied by a series of crashing sounds, pieces of broken parts flew into the air. The midget rider in the cockpit immediately activated the ejection seat, and escaped like a crow on an airplane. "Loser, leave," the midget in charge immediately announced. He didn't want the mastodon rider to continue hurting his own people, so he stood up to help him out. With this pardon, the midget rider who escaped from the ejection seat landed on the ground, patted his butt and ran to the exit of the arena. How did that mastodon appear behind the mechanical chocobo? Grimm looked at Keys and asked in a low voice, "Is it a magical beast? Or does that Goliath warrior bear crusher have some special ability?" In response to his question, Keys only nodded. "That mastodon has the bloodline of a phase creature." This was just a lie. the young blue dragon couldn't explain to him what a leviathan was. After defeating the mechanical chocobo, Bear Crusher rode the mastodon back to his tent. A few of his people ran over, and brought over the broken tooth of the mastodon that was stuck on the wall of the gray tower, along with a ring made of adamantine. The substitute knights of the other mayors all looked at the tent in Emerald Wood City. They were all praying, hoping that they wouldn't encounter such a terrifying opponent in the afternoon battle. In front of that guy, the warhorse is no better than a little kitten, a knight in a red cape, representing Red Pine City, sighed. Plus that giant-like rider on its back, this combination can be used as a dozen knights. Many people agreed with him, but no one felt that it was against the rules to let such a knight fight. After all, in Ramsey's ancient knight competitions, there had been even more terrifying participants such as Wyvern Knights and Behemoth Knight. The power to set the rules was always in the hands of the strong. Originally, the commander-in-chief elected by the Ramsey Alliance was actually Mayor Green of Emerald Wood City, and the dwarves held the knight tournament to usurp that person's authority. Although not all the mayors of the human cities were willing to obey Grimm's command, they had more or less made comparisons in their hearts, and indeed recognized the strength possessed by Grimm and Emerald Wood City. They also wanted to take advantage of the meeting held by the gnomes to measure Grimm's weight, and at the same time take the opportunity to try to seize the highest command of the Union Army in order to seek benefits for themselves and their own cities. However, when the mastodon and smashed bear's head entered the field and defeated the midget's mechanical chocobo rider in an unstoppable manner, many of those who had their own plans extinguished their ambitions. There was no other reason. It was purely because they had already seen that they were no match for him. Unless the pygmies insisted on using an even tougher attitude and announced that someone else would replace Grimm, no one could challenge the authority of a mayor who had a mastodon knight. For the rest of the morning, the attention of all the mayors wasn't on the field below the stands. They were all staring at the final decision-maker of the pygmies, Elder Freya Ironbeard. Only the ordinary citizens who were watching the show were still cheering for the knights who were putting their strength into the competition. The results of the competition have been announced. The following cities have qualified for the team battle. A pygmy host walked to the top of the stands and stood beside the loudspeaker to announce the results of the morning's competition. After a whole morning of competition, only a few of the mayor's substitute knights defeated the mechanical chocobo rider. And the mayors they represented, because the current situation was unclear, decisively gave up the right to compete for the team battle crown in the afternoon. Only one person, a result that no one expected, the exiled mayor of Soft Maple City, was willing to personally compete with Grimm for the championship. And this fat mayor, who looked a little fat, seemed to be full of confidence, as if he was determined to win the championship. Regarding his choice, not only the mayors of the other cities, even Grimm, who was his opponent, didn't understand. One had to know that the current Soft Maple City existed in name only. After the big retreat, the original Soft Maple City had become a satellite town of Emerald Wood City. Although it wasn't to the extent of being dependent on others, but the citizens of Soft Maple City, whether it was clothing, food, housing, or transportation, they couldn't do without Emerald Wood City and Grimm's support. And this fat mayor, at this time, actually chose to go against Grimm. This was no longer a question of ungrateful wolf, this was simply a question of death. Unless the pygmies promised enough benefits and at the same time provided enough help, he wouldn't do this if he had any sense left. Simply blinded by greed, Grimm coldly snorted. At noon, when all the mayors were on their way to the milk house for the feast, he ordered his own attendant to immediately issue an order to the tax officials of Emerald Wood City. From today onwards, Soft Maple Satellite Town will no longer enjoy tax subsidies. Putting aside the person who was about to explode in anger, Quess was actually quite curious about the fat mayor's abnormal behavior. Because the fat mayor was the first human leader of Ramsey that the young blue dragon came into contact with, Keyes could be said to have a better understanding of him, whether it was his temperament or his own strength. Logically speaking, there was simply no possibility or need for the fat mayor to stand on the opposite side of Grimm. The only armed forces under his command were the group of mercenaries that he personally hired from his own pocket. Even if the mercenary group leader and several of his trusted subordinates were elites who had experienced hundreds of battles, in a group battle of the night tournament, those people were no match for Grimm's knights. In order to become a knight under a lord like Grimm, in addition to armor, swords, and a warhorse, one also had to receive strict knight training from a young age and master all the skills of a horse battle. Obviously, as mercenaries, they absolutely couldn't have that kind of learning opportunity. Moreover, when the pygmy host announced the participants for the afternoon competition, the fat mayor of Soft Maple City had indeed let the mercenaries take his place in the competition. Keyes had some impression of the names mentioned in the list. What gave him the courage? Thinking back to the previous incident where the fat mayor poisoned Rake, Keyes thought that the fat mayor was still riding on the coattails of the dwarf island. But now, he still didn't know what the dwarf island had given him to give him such courage. Chapter 7:16. You have to give me an explanation. The mercenary leader stared at the employer in front of him, but there was no respect in his tone. Although I also use my fists to punish my subordinates, I only do it when they deserve it, and I won't let others do it for me. The fat mayor smiled awkwardly. He didn't know that the situation would turn out like this. Obviously, he only brought a few substitute knights to replace the mercenaries, but who knew that the substitute knights would use such a direct method to make the mercenaries unable to fight? I will compensate you. Looking at the mercenaries who were holding their waists and couldn't stand steadily, the fat mayor gritted his teeth and said, "And your subordinates, each of them will get 50 cat's eye emerald coins. Your share will be doubled." The mercenary leader snorted, "We only want half of the emerald coins, and the other half will be exchanged for full body armor, healing potions, and 30 well-trained purebred horses, half for each male and half for each female." Because Rake had wantonly attacked the dwarf's financial system in Emerald City, they also had some doubts about the shiny currency issued by the dwarf. Therefore, to be safe, he had to replace it with real objects. "Leader, there's something wrong with those guys. Even if he could get a generous compensation, he still suffered a loss. As the deputy leader, how could old AI have a good impression of those guys?" He approached his leader and whispered, "They don't seem to be human." The exiled mayor of Soft Maple City had a good hearing, but he was actually quite good at hearing. Therefore, he heard old AI's reminder. "They are definitely not ordinary people, they are humanoid weapons loaned to us by Dwarf Island," he continued to explain. "They are lightning monks." Following the fat mayor's introduction, the people, who were hiding in the linen hooded sweaters, all raised their heads, revealing a strange face covered with swirling patterns. "What the hell are these monsters?" The mercenary leader pulled out his sword with a whoosh. There was no doubt that he was a little frightened by the lightning monk. There were no facial features on the other party's face at all, only a small hole flashing red light in the right eye. The electric monks looked like zombies that had crawled out of their graves after death. Their skin was an unhealthy lead gray color. The lightning monks are the most loyal monks of His Holiness Stim of Dwarf Island. They have dedicated their lives to the god of virtual games. The plump mayor pointed at the hooded men. Moreover, they were the first batch of humans to worship that god. The mercenary leader gasped and sucked in a breath of cold air. Although he had heard of the god that the dwarves on Dwarf Island worshipped, he had never heard of any humans worshipping such an existence. Furthermore, he had never thought that these human worshippers would turn into something that was neither human nor ghost. "It's only one day in the world, but it's been thousands of years in the virtual game," the fat mayor continued. "These pioneers have been training in the virtual game for more than 3 years. Each of them is proficient in various combat skills, including riding. At the same time, they are also the priests of that god. They can cast a variety of powerful divine spells. They are the strongest aid that Dwarf Island can provide to Maple City." Hearing his praise, the lightning monks still didn't have any reaction, and they didn't seem to have any intention of preparing for the upcoming group battle. Saddles, bridles, belts. They didn't even check their weapons personally, as if they had a card up their sleeves. "I hope it's just as the fat man said." The mercenary leader carefully stroked the handle of his lance to check if there were any cracks on the handle. "If they pull their legs halfway, I'll fall directly under the warhorse. Playing dead is much better than fighting those monsters." Unlike the morning competition, other than firing a salute to the sky, the ceremonial guards also blew the horn out of respect for Mayor Grimm. In the melodious sound of the horn, both sides of the competition came out of the silk tents one after another. On Grimm's side, he rode a brown warhorse at the forefront. Half a body's length behind him, there was a knight in black armor riding a black steed. The broken bear's head was riding a tango. The broken tusk of the mastodon had been repaired by the adamantine hoop. The remaining 3 knights were the Iron Guards who had been vassals of the Grimm family since childhood. They were wearing the dark green armor unique to high-ranking generals in Emerald City. Walking to the middle of the field, Grimm raised his right hand with the iron lobster gauntlet. The whole team stopped in their tracks. They were ready. As long as Grimm gave the order, the 7 knights would change into a wedge-shaped formation with the broken bear's head as the arrowhead and directly crush the opponent. Not long after, the tent opposite the sparring field was also opened by some attendants. At the front was the mercenary captain who had replaced the fat mayor in the competition. He was now a knight by his employer. Although he didn't have a fief, he still belonged to the lowest noble class in Ramsey. The mercenary captain was fully armed, wearing a set of adamantine plate armor. He held a round shield in his left hand and a 6-foot-long war spear in his right hand. The handle of the spear was reinforced with steel strips. He also wore shoulder pads and throat protectors. The round iron helmet on his head only left a thin slit in front of him for observation. As for the knights behind him, they attracted the attention of everyone in the spectator stands and the martial arts arena. Those people were covered in brown linen cloaks with a hood. Looking at the extent of their bulging bodies, they should only be wearing a chainmail jacket. They didn't hold long weapons in their hands, nor did they hold shields. They only held 2 short spears that looked like throwing weapons. They looked particularly shabby. Is this the method of the gnomes? In the stands, Keyes narrowed his eyes. He wasn't like the other spectators who judged people by their appearance. Instead, he looked at the magic aura on those people with great interest. They sent a group of priests shrouded in divine grace? At this time, the loudspeaker at the top of the stands sounded. The gnome host announced to all the spectators, "Due to the physical condition of the Knights of Soft Maple City before the competition, the contestants have been temporarily replaced. Now I announce that the night tournament officially begins." Following this announcement, Grimm's right hand, which had been raised all this time, immediately swung down. The 7 knights of Emeraldwood City quickly changed their formation. The broken bear's head rode the mastodon tango to the front of the formation. The other 6 knights formed a standard wedge-shaped formation behind him. "Charge!" Grimm shouted. The mastodon tango raised his trunk to the sky and let out a long cry. They took the lead in launching a charge. Chapter 7:17. Spread out, don't face their attack head-on. Seeing that the knights of Emeraldwood City were about to rush in front of them, the mercenary leader loudly shouted to the lightning monks behind him. As the acting knight of the mayor of Soft Maple City, according to the rules of the night tournament, he had the right to give orders on the field. However, the 6 lightning monks turned a deaf ear to him. A bunch of idiots. The mercenary leader was too lazy to waste his breath on them. He pulled the reins of his warhorse and urged it to dash out. "We have to avoid the first wave of attack. We can't fall off the horse next to the mastodon, otherwise it's too dangerous." But just as he ran away, the lightning monks immediately moved in unison. Just as the fat mayor once said to the mercenary leader, every lightning monk was proficient in riding. They rode their war horses to form a scattered line, not dilly-dallying at all. Without any communication, these lightning monks all swung their arms and threw the short spears in their hands like javelins at the galloping mastodon knight. 12 short spears formed an encirclement, and Broken Bearhead, who was sitting on the tango, had nowhere to hide. He could only throw the spear in his hand and grab a spare shield from the elephant's saddle. Together with the tower shield on his left arm, they swung with all their might to block the short spears coming at them. The sharp spear tips scratched the thick oak shield covered with iron, making more than 10 scratching sounds. 2 short spears also pierced the mastodon's skull from a tricky angle, but they were blocked by the thick soft fur and leather on the tango's body, causing no damage. Different from what Broken Bearhead thought, the weapons thrown by the knights who didn't look very strong were actually very powerful. Being bombarded by the short spears continuously, even if he blocked it in time with his shield and didn't get injured, he was still thrown out of the elephant's saddle by the impact. This Goliath warrior, who was more than 8 feet tall, directly fell from the mastodon's back. Fortunately, the knights of Emerald Wood City behind him were well trained. They turned their horses around and let Broken Bearhead's body pass by, not letting him be trampled by the horse's hooves. But in this way, the wedge formation was instantly broken. Through a surprise attack, the other party had achieved their tactical goal. The lightning monks immediately urged their mounts to bypass the tango that was trying to intercept them and rushed to the side of the Emerald Wood City knight. Without their short spears, the lightning monks immediately untied the flail from their saddle buckles and fiercely attacked the knights. Unlike other weapons, the kite shield in the hands of the knights of Emerald Wood City seemed somewhat powerless in the face of the flail. The chains were always able to circle behind the shields and deal heavy blows to the knights. Even though they were all wearing iron lobster gauntlets and pauldrons, the spiked hammerheads would turn their bodies under the armor into bruises as long as they were hit. In a mere face-to-face encounter, except for Green and the 2 highly skilled paladins of Tom, the other several Emerald Wood City knights wearing dark green armor were all attacked by the lightning monks and knocked down from their horses. One of the knights' feet was still stuck in the stirrup and was dragged more than 40 yards away by the warhorse. The remaining few knights desperately tried to stand up, but the lightning monks immediately used the flail to hit their helmets and knock them back to the ground. "Change to the hammer!" Green shouted loudly and then immediately threw away the lance in his hand and picked up the hammer hanging on his saddle buckle. He used his shield to block a flail strike and then swung the hammer to hit the shoulder blade of a lightning monk. The 2-pound hammer head hit the opponent and made a sound similar to that of a wooden stick hitting soaked leather, but the effect was only that. Looking at the attire of the lightning monk, at most, he only wore a piece of chain armor under his linen robe and didn't wear any protective equipment such as shoulder pads. But when the hammer hit his body, it seemed to only cause him a little trouble. He didn't let out a miserable howl and his body didn't deform like a normal person. The iron helmet on his head was filled with the stench of sweat similar to that of wet cow dung. Feeling the anxiety in his heart, Green hurriedly calmed his mind. He tightened his legs, and the nimble warhorse he was sitting on immediately understood his master's intentions and abruptly galloped forward. He put his hand into his saddlebag and took out 2 iron caltrops that had been filled with impact oil. He threw them behind him without even looking at them. He did this not because he wanted to injure his opponent, but because he wanted to prevent his opponent from following him on his horse. The iron caltrops collided with each other and made a bang sound. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Green hurriedly took out a fully loaded crossbow from his saddlebag. He turned his horse around and clamped the crossbow on his iron lobster's handguard, wanting to aim at the opponent and give him a fatal blow. But the lightning monk that was originally chasing him didn't have the intention to pay attention to him and directly ran toward the other paladin Tom. "Damned guy!" Green cursed under his iron helmet. But at this time, the sound of a sharp weapon piercing through the air suddenly sounded from his side. The other lightning monk had already circled around to his side, and was now swinging his flail to attack. Green raised his shield, wanting to block this surprise attack, but the expected fierce attack didn't appear on his arm. After a crisp paw sound, the warhorse under Emeraldwood City's mayor let out a mournful cry. It turned out that the enemy didn't want to attack Green at all. His real target was actually Green's mount. Because he was wearing an iron helmet, Green's vision was obstructed, so he couldn't discover this in advance. The pitiful warhorse suffered a head-on blow, and the vest it was wearing didn't have much of a protective effect. The huge horse's head instantly became badly mutilated, and red and white things flowed out from the seams of the vest. After a mournful cry, the warhorse's hooves immediately went soft and it fell to the ground together with Green. A buzz sound came from the stands. Many mayors who were watching the tournament all stood up in anger. A knight wouldn't do such a despicable act. In the tournament, you can't deliberately hurt the other knight's mount. According to Ramsay's tradition, many nobles, even the most ordinary knight class, were very pure horse lovers. Unless they were forced to do so on the battlefield, they would never do anything that would harm their horses. Some mercenary knights, because they didn't have a fief, often suffered from poverty. But even if they only had 1 or 2 gem coins in their pockets, many people would spend this money on an apple for their mount or buy a bag of oat. A knight who doesn't abide by the rules isn't worthy of being a knight. In addition to the big shots in the stands, many knights who lost in the morning's tournament and lost their qualifications were now standing at the side of the tournament field to watch the tournament. They chopped their swords on the railing, venting their anger while loudly reprimanding the unjust actions on the field. Chapter 7:18. Being crushed by a warhorse, Mayor Grimm's legs were unnaturally twisted, but even so, he did not faint. The hammer had already been tossed to God knows where. He held the crossbow tightly in one hand, while his other hand dug out a lot of dirt from the ground that was scattered with white dust. As long as the enemy came to finish him off, he would teach them a lesson they would remember for the rest of their lives. However, the lightning monk who took the initiative to kill the horse had no time to take care of him. After Grimm fell to the ground, the 2 paladins who had once vowed to protect him in front of the statue of the god of courage and loyalty rushed to the lightning monk as if they had gone mad. They did not care about their own safety. Even if the enemies around them added a few more scars to their bodies, these 2 paladins still did not hesitate to put their backs under the attack of the enemy's weapons, and then rush to the Lord. Originally, they had already made preparations to mobilize their holy power to prevent themselves from being seriously injured. But they worried too much. Smashed Barehead had already climbed up from the ground. This powerful Goliath warrior rushed to the lightning monk, who was about to attack the 2 black-armored knights. Smashed Barehead felt humiliated after being shot down from the war elephant, so he was very angry at the moment. His weapons were hanging on the back of the tango, but even so, he did not have the slightest intention to take them. Smashed Barehead, this name had been with him for more than 60 years. The lifespan of the Goliath race was about 200 years. This was the name he got in his coming-of-age ceremony by smashing the head of a ferocious bear with his bare hands. Therefore, even if he did not have a weapon in hand, Smashed Barehead was not afraid because his fists were the most powerful weapon. Bang! The Goliath warrior's fist hit the lightning monk's raised arm, and the huge impact made the enemy fall from the horse. Then, he immediately squatted down to dodge the flail that came from the side. He then kicked the other lightning monk off his horse. Losing the control of their riders, and feeling the anger of the Goliath warrior beside them, the 2 war horses immediately broke into a gallop. They ran directly to the railing of the arena and obediently stood there. They lowered their heads and nibbled on the grass, pretending that it had nothing to do with them. The 2 lightning monks who were shot to the ground looked at each other, then quickly retreated and gathered with their companions. The entire arena was suddenly divided into 2 battlefields. On one side, Two Tom paladins in black armor were crazily attacking a lightning monk. On the other side, the remaining 6 lightning monks were huddled together, preparing to fight a decisive battle with the Goliath warriors. Roar! The Mastodon War Elephant Tango's roar attracted everyone's attention. Having been transformed into a leviathan, it had a much sharper sense for danger than ordinary creatures. It sensed that a dangerous aura, which did not originate from the lightning monks, was quietly approaching, so it hurriedly issued a warning. Of course, the person it wanted to remind wasn't Smashed Bear Chieftain and the others, but the young blue dragon who was watching the battle from the stands. Keys, on the other hand, was looking up at the sky. In his line of sight, a huge flying carpet was situated at the top of the sky. On the carpet stood a creature that was as large as a mastodon and a tango. Although he had never seen it before, Keys could still guess who it was from the intense magic waves emitted from its body. The Emperor actually came to Emerald Wood City. Shouldn't he be busy creating his own monster army? Just as he was guessing what the ancient slave master Ramsay was plotting, the Emperor jumped down from the edge of the flying carpet and directly appeared in the middle of the arena using a high-level teleportation spell. In an instant, the entire arena— no, it should be said that everyone who saw this scene was boiling with excitement. Monster! The knights on both sides who were fiercely fighting suddenly stopped. Even the Goliath warrior, Smashed Bear Chieftain, who was not good at thinking, stopped his angry iron fist at this time. He glanced at the direction of the stands and then calmed down. Quess was personally overseeing this place. A game of ants. The Emperor opened his big mouth full of fangs and said in a mocking tone, "This game was introduced to Ramsay by me in order to educate your ancestors and let them understand the most basic sense of honor." 2 Tom paladins worked together to lift the horse's corpse and helped their lord to stand up. One of the black-armored knights took out a horn from his back and blew it with all his strength. The guards in the milk-house heard the horn and immediately rang the city's alarm. In a moment, all the guards in Emerald Wood City would gather here to fight against this monster that suddenly appeared. On the spectator's stand, several dwarf elders pressed buttons in their hands. Their seats were equipped with ejector escape seats similar to the ones on the Chocobo. Once the switch was activated, these esteemed dwarves were all ejected out of the arena like crows on an airplane. "No!" Freg Ironbeard shouted loudly to stop them. Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. Just as the dwarf elders were about to land and run into the gray tower to avoid danger, a green flame barrier suddenly rose from the railing of the arena. There was no doubt that the dwarf elders who were still in the air were all burned by the flame. They did not even have the chance to scream before they turned into piles of ashes and drifted away with the wind. "I did not allow you to leave," the Emperor said with a sinister smile. "As spectators, how can you leave first? I have to teach you a lesson and let you see what a proper gladiatorial battle is, and not this messy night tournament." When he finished speaking, the green flames condensed into the shape of a long spear in the middle of his four-fingered hand. The Emperor shook his wrist and the flame fell to the ground, burning bowl-sized holes in the ground. A fine gold spear suddenly appeared in his hand. "As for the entrance fee to watch the gladiator fight, you have to save your lives for the time being. I will collect the money from you later." "Don't worry, I won't let you wait for too long," the Emperor announced cruelly. However, before he could charge, the Mastodon Tango, who had already received Key's order, was the first to charge at him. Because it needed to run to gain enough momentum, it did not use blink like before to appear behind the enemy. "You're overestimating yourself." Seeing his opponent provoking him, the Emperor snorted coldly. He did not dodge and directly charged at the Mastodon. Before the two behemoths collided, the ancient slave master Ramsay stabbed his golden spear into the Tango's body. Then, he grabbed the tusk of the Mastodon with both hands and twisted it to the ground with his arms. Chapter 719. Roar. After throwing the Mastodon to the ground, the Emperor roared to the sky, showing off his courage and power to intimidate others. As he roared, his foul breath spewed out, and the air seemed to become oily, with a texture unique to magic. Purple and green sparks flashed in the air, shining brightly. A cloud of white smoke rose in the arena, and the chains that tied the railings slowly began to melt. "You want to scare people?" Quest sneered. "You're really an emperor who pays attention to ostentation. But so what? He is the emperor. Against evil, there is no need to be chivalrous. Everyone, let's kill him together." Obviously, fear did not corrupt the young blue dragon's mind, and some of the more violent mayors were not afraid either. Or it could be said that they used reason to overcome their fear. Against the emperor, making peace or pleading for mercy would not end well. There were more than 60 mayors of the cities here, and more than a dozen surviving dwarf elders. These big shots more or less had some life-saving trump cards. In addition, in the tents around the arena, there were guards, squire knights, a small team of mechanical chocobo riders, and more than 300 real knights from various cities participating in the knights' tournament. If they worked together, they might even be able to topple the emperor. After all, according to the information passed down, the ancient ruler of Ramsey was only a powerful legendary warrior and legendary mage. He had not been promoted to a god, and did not have the omnipotent power of a god to change reality. To the arena! The dwarf elder Freya Ironbeard shouted as he jumped down the wooden railings of the spectators' stand. For a moment, shoes and robes fluttered, and everyone in the spectators' stand wanted to be the last. Even so, they all made it in time. The emperor was looking at the challengers who had just left the arena with interest. He even threw a few fireballs at the spectators' stand, trying to wake up the people walking at the back so that they could move faster. The first to reach the arena was the team of mechanical chocobo riders, and they even brought Ironbeard's own mount. It was a velociraptor, but it was twice the size of an ordinary mechanical chocobo, and its height could reach the emperor's thigh. Then, the well-dressed knights all rode out of the tents, followed by a larger number of squires. Unfortunately, the tamed horses of those attendants were all stored in the stables of Emerald Wood City. Many knights were not given 2 or 3 spare warhorses. Therefore, those attendants could only hold weapons such as swords, shields, hammers, and so on, pretending to be ordinary infantrymen and covering behind their lord. However, these knights were originally elites who represented their respective cities in battle. They were not chicks who had never been on the battlefield before. As they entered the arena, they spontaneously formed a wedge-shaped charging formation, and the arrows pointed at the emperor standing in the middle. As for the guards of the arena, they were all equipped with crossbows in case of an accident because of Green's previous instructions. And now, the appearance of the emperor had put their preparations to good use. The guards stood along the railings of the arena, forming a half-moon shooting formation. The lightning monks and Grim, who were at loggerheads with each other, had reached a temporary reconciliation. The lightning monks not only revealed their identity as Stim's priests, and used divine spells to fix Grim's broken leg, they also took the initiative to cover the retreat of the mayor of Emerald Wood City. "Are you done with your tricks?" Patiently waiting for the other side to finish moving their troops, the emperor asked in a calm and unruffled manner. Having something to rely on but not fear, this was the portrayal of the emperor's heart, but his performance aroused the anger of the human and dwarf allied army. Grim, who had just recovered from his injuries, immediately rode on the warhorse of his subordinate, Tom, and squeezed to the front of the army, standing together with Freya Ironbeard. He lifted his iron helmet, revealing his bruised face. He raised his shield and chanted aloud, "Oak and steel, keep me safe and from hell." Then, he raised the war spear in his hand. Cyanwood iron spear, like a waterfall. "Kill the enemy, protect our lord, protect our rivers and mountains." Although these words were not loud, it still made the blood of many knights surge. How many years had it been? They finally had the chance to loudly chant the knight's motto in their lifetime. Kill the enemy, protect our rivers and mountains. The knights present repeated in unison. Grim revealed a smile. Although his face was still bruised, his shin guard, hand guard, and even the gap between his thighs were filled with wet mud, he could still ride into battle, and this was enough. He personally buckled his helmet, locking the buckle tightly. The mayor of Emeraldwood City turned his head to look at Freya Ironbeard, and then loudly announced his order: charge towards the ancient tyrant, the great enemy of the Ramsay people, the knights. Many knights responded in succession. They closed their visors, tightened the buckles of their helmet, breastplate, and chainmail, and held their 8-foot-long war spears under their armpits. Then, they urged their mounts to move forward in small steps, and slowly increased the speed of their charge. While the knights were charging, the well-trained guards of Emeraldwood City quickly filled in their positions. They raised the crossbows in their hands at a 45-degree angle and shot a rain of arrows. Buzzing, buzzing, the arrows flew behind the knights into the air, and then quickly fell near the emperor's body. Of course, these people did not expect the arrows to succeed. The reason they shot a rain of arrows was to hinder the enemy from casting spells, creating a suitable opportunity for the charging knights to attack. After 3 rounds of shooting, the knights at the front came close to the emperor. Their lances were all aimed at the gap between the legs of this behemoth, wanting to paralyze his mobility by severely injuring his joint. Seeing this scene, the emperor, who had just used multiple protection arrows to render those arrows ineffective, could not help but snort coldly. He lifted his forelimbs and stomped on the ground. After a muffled bang, dense stone spikes suddenly sprang out around him like thorns. The experienced knights hurriedly pulled on the reins of their war horses, controlling their mounts to leap over the obstacles. As for the knights who weren't that skilled in horsemanship, they didn't react in time and crashed into the stone spike. Because they were wearing thick armor, the knights were only knocked dizzy by the impact. But the war horses under them were not so lucky. The stone spikes cut through the bellies of the war horses. Blood and intestines flowed out as they howled and fell. Chapter 720. Although Glenn was not the fastest, he still managed to rush to the front. Many of the knights followed him bravely. The reason why they could do this was mainly because of the Goliath warrior's bare head. In front of the Goliath, the stone spikes were as soft as mud. Unlike others, as the mayor of Emeraldwood City, Glenn had high expectations for himself. The place where the tip of the spear was pointed was not the emperor's thick thigh, but the giant's chest. Sometimes you have to fight with your life. The heat inside the helmet made his breathing a little chaotic. This reminded him of more than 10 years ago, when he was still a young man who had just grown a beard. He went to hunt a mountain giant alone. However, compared to the mountain giant, the emperor's body was bigger and stronger. "You are a brave ant." Looking at Glenn, who was pointing the spear at his chest, the emperor let out a loud roar. But an ant will always be an ant. In his hand was a dead horse. It was the only thing left behind by a knight who was lucky enough to run to his side, and was then punched into a pulp. Lifting the tall horse like a chick, the emperor threw it forward and threw it at Grim, who was charging forward. "Tom, help me!" The black-armored knight, who was following closely behind the emperor, saw this and immediately shouted the holy name. Immediately after, this sacred warrior leaped high from his own mount. Like a cannonball, he blasted toward the horse corpse that the emperor had thrown at Grim. The huge recoil made the black-armored knight's mount sit on the ground. And it was also because of this powerful force that Tom's paladin jumped high and brandished his scimitar to split the horse corpse in two. "God bless!" Glenn loudly praised the god of loyalty and courage. Then, he focused all of his attention and remained motionless like a fly sealed in amber. Holding the pitch-black 8-foot spear, he gritted his teeth, lowered his spurs, and used all his strength to clamp his thighs, becoming one with the horse. "I am the horse is me, we are the same beast, we are one, we are one." The helmet became so hot that Glenn could hardly breathe. He saw the emperor's huge body and the dark purple diamond-shaped scales that looked like armor on his body. When he was young, his riding master had warned him countless times that if a knight put down his spear at the last moment, there would be a danger of aiming too low. It's useful to break a spear in a duel, but in a real battle, it's suicidal. Glen recited his master's teachings and raised the tip of his spear a few inches higher, pointing it straight at the Emperor's heart. Just as he adjusted himself and was about to deliver the most satisfying piercing blow in his life, the Emperor on the other side suddenly moved and began to adjust his body. With an agility that did not match his body size, the Emperor moved a large distance away. "Damned guy," Green cursed loudly. His attack had completely missed its target. However, that was not all. After the Emperor dodged the charge of the knights, he waved the fine gold spear in his hand as if he was waving a long stick. Crack, crack, crack! The sound of bones breaking and tendons snapping rang out one after another. More than a dozen horses, including the one under Glen, all had their legs broken by the Emperor's sweep. Accompanied by the neighing of the horses, the knights were directly sent flying from their horses' backs under the effect of inertia. His ribs were in severe pain and his left arm did not listen to him. Out of nowhere, a 3-foot-long piece of broken wood and iron pierced through oak, wool, and steel, piercing Glen's arm. He used his right hand to hold the bottom of the broken spear, clenched his teeth, and pulled it out with all his might. Blood gushed out, seeping through the chain mail and soaking the robe. The mayor of Emerald Wood City only felt the world spinning. However, in the haze, he faintly heard the Emperor's unbridled laughter through the thick iron helmet. The beautiful shield had lost its function. He threw it all away and pulled out his sword. However, his injuries were too severe. There was no way he could even get up from the ground, let alone use his sword to fight. Turning his neck with difficulty, Glen tried to understand the situation around him. The 2 black-armored sacred warriors were now getting up from the ground. It seemed that they still had the strength to fight. The knights who followed him in the charge were either lying on the necks of their horses or unconscious in a pool of blood-stained mud. The remaining 100 or so knights were circling around in a circle, guarding against the stone spikes that could jump up from the ground at any time. The guards in the arena were now busy reloading the crossbows in the entire arena. The only ones who had yet to fight against the Emperor were the mechanical chocobo riders from Dwarf Island and the 6 lightning monks who had almost defeated the Knights of Emerald Wood City and won the championship. However, Glen did not place his confidence in them. "Where is Mr. Keyes?" The mayor of Emerald Wood City widened his eyes. He wanted to find something that could give him some peace of mind through the gaps of the iron helmet, but he could not find the person he was looking for. "Lowly ants!" The Emperor roared loudly. Then, he stretched out his hand. In an instant, a strange and irresistible force suddenly appeared and grabbed the injured Glen and pulled him into his palm. Ignoring Glen's struggle, in fact, struggling was useless, the Emperor used 2 fingers to pinch Glen's iron helmet. "I heard that this ant is the commander-in-chief of your alliance? That's perfect. I'll give him the honor of becoming a general of calamity to serve this king. If you want to be envious, then be envious. After all, not all ants have this opportunity." After saying this, the Emperor's palm burst out a light green fluorescent light, enveloping the captured Glen. The reason why he came to Emerald Wood City today was not because he was interested in the Knights tournament. The Emperor had 2 real purposes. One was to behead the mayors of Ramsey who had come to participate in the tournament. The other was to deal with Green, the commander-in-chief of the Alliance army. He wanted to attack Green's heart by turning him into a raiding general. With his ability, it would not take much effort to turn a general into a general. However, just as he was about to succeed, a dazzling light suddenly burst out from the coat of arms that Glen wore on his chest. The coat of arms that was blessed by Tom, wrapped in the power of the god of loyalty and courage, dispelled the Emperor's distortion power. Like snow that was exposed to the sun, the Emperor's spell gradually began to melt. "Damn divine power!" The Emperor roared at the sky. His fingers were burned by the light of the divine power and had several bloody blisters. Chapter 7:21. The Emperor was very angry both because of himself and because of him. The power of the gods had the power to change reality, and the spell he used to distort Grimm was like snow under the sun, melting away. Those guys are liars. When you exchanged your faith for blessings, you have already fallen into their trap. The Emperor roared angrily. But because his palm was stung by the divine power, he still threw the mayor of Emerald Wood City far away. Flames appeared in his eyes. That was the literal meaning. Wisps of flames rose from the corners of his eyes. The muscles of the ancient emperor bulged, and he mobilized his magic to heal the injury on his palm. Some people will never learn to respect the strong, just because they will not deceive you and call themselves false gods. Walking with his legs that were as thick as stone pillars, the emperor walked step by step toward the knights in the arena, and the latter reined in their horses and retreated step by step. Passing by a knight who fell to the ground, holding his broken leg and crying out in pain, the emperor reached out his hand and clenched it hard. The knight's screams came to an abrupt end, as if his neck had been choked. At a speed visible to the naked eye, the knight's body quickly became shriveled. Cracks appeared on his skin. Immediately after, a demonic green flame gushed out from those cracks, burning the knight into a pile of ashes. Black smoke rose from the ashes, and like a swallow returning to its nest, it flew into the emperor's palm. All of his life force and soul were seized by the terrible enemy, and became the enemy's help to continue the violence. It's similar to the casting method of the Ashes world. Keys, who had hidden his body in the crowd and disguised himself as an armored knight, looked at the emperor's operation and thought to himself, but at the same time, it can also absorb soul energy. No wonder the emperor is not tolerated by the gods. Absorbing soul energy for one's own use, from a certain point of view, was a taboo for all spellcasters in the multiverse. Even some ridiculously powerful spellcasters would not choose to use souls as their source of energy for casting spells, because doing so would be suspected of contaminating the source of power of the gods and many demons. Once this matter was exposed, the caster would most likely be hunted down by many gods and demons. In ancient times, there had been some soul spellcasters in the Ash world, but there was a reason for that. Firstly, there was something wrong with that world itself. The gods had cursed that world, and that plane was a forbidden zone for all gods. Secondly, although the soul power mages in the Ash world could manipulate souls, they used the soul-devouring tower to attract wandering souls, and then used the purified souls as their own spellcasting energy. They did not directly absorb soul energy like the emperors. It was no wonder that the gods had helped the humans of Ramsey in ancient times to fight against him, a powerful being who had unified the entire plane. In the end, they had sealed him in a large tomb. However, there was one thing that Keys didn't quite understand. Why didn't they solve the hidden danger of the Emperor once and for all? Instead, they chose an unsafe method of sealing? In addition to what Shay said, this Emperor may have mastered the method of creating a new phantom snake. He must be hiding some other secret. Keys pondered while carefully observing the Emperor's every move. In the main material plane such as Faerun, the spells that ordinary mages could use had an upper limit of energy level. That was a set of rules set by the gods to prevent mortals from using spells that could threaten them. However, in the Ash world, or by absorbing the vitality of other creatures to cast spells like Ramsey's Emperor, it was more convenient to use some powerful spells without the limit of energy level. In theory, if such a spellcaster could absorb enough energy, it was not impossible to cast a spell that could kill gods. However, the number of obsidian magic beads that the mages of the Ash world could carry was limited. At the same time, because most of the Ash world was covered by desert, the ecological resources and population were not so abundant. Therefore, the spellcasters there had a natural limit to their abilities, and the secular society was not controlled by them. However, the Emperor would not be shackled by these shackles. Although the Ramsey plane was not a large main material plane, it was still a rich material plane. The natural resources and population here were enough for the Emperor to squander. Moreover, with the ability that he had shown so far, it seemed that he did not need obsidian magic beads at all. He was a powerful magic creature, and his huge body was a natural battery that could be used to store the energy he had absorbed. In addition, what he had absorbed was not only the vitality of creatures, but also the soul energy of the other party. One operation, two gains. The energy he had absorbed from a knight was even more than the total energy stored in half a dozen obsidian magic beads carried by a spellcaster in the Ash world. Then, there was another question. Why didn't the Emperor absorb this energy at the beginning? Could it be that he could only do this when the victim had no ability to resist? Also, why did he only absorb the vitality and soul of one knight? There were now more than a dozen knights lying beside him. Could it be that he was also subject to some restrictions? The more he knew about the Emperor, the more doubts Keyes had in his heart. The secrets hidden by the ancient slave master of Ramsey aroused his curiosity. Since the leading lamb has rejected the honor of becoming a calamity general, then I will divide this honor equally and bestow upon all of you the opportunity to serve this king. A resplendent light burst forth from the Emperor's palm, illuminating the eyes of everyone in the arena. Unlike before when he wanted to transform Grimm into a calamity general, he wanted to transform the knights into monsters on a large scale. He did not believe that everyone present was like the mayor of Emerald Wood City, who could have treasures bestowed by the gods. As if he had made up his mind, the Emperor wanted to transform a wave of his own servants in this arena. However, his plan once again fell through. It was still the power of the gods that offset his effort. However, this time, it was not a holy object that suddenly exploded on someone's body, but the power of the lightning monks. They were the priests of Stim. When the Emperor cast the transformation spell, they immediately began to summon the god of virtual games that they worshipped to counteract the Emperor's spell. Chapter 7:22. Chanting the holy name and raising the flail in their hands, the electric monks gathered holy power at the tip of their weapons, and a milky white beam of light shot straight at the Emperor. This was the most common attack method used by the priests, and was often given the name Divine Strike. It could also be used to interrupt spells cast by mages. Poof, poof, poof. The Divine Strike did not hit the Emperor, but it eroded the spell model he had set up. After being hit by the milky white beam of light, blue and green spell model fragments scattered around him like fireworks. Everyone, retreat to the edge of the arena. At the right moment, Freya Ironbeard gave his order. Through the loudspeaker installed in the Velociraptor's cockpit, his voice was clearly transmitted to every knight's ears. "Attention all Chocobo riders," he quickly said, "activate the Kingslayer formation immediately." Following his order, the dwarf pilots on the back of the Chocobo got to work. They used one hand to push the joystick to get their mounts to a suitable position, while the other hand was busy unlocking the weapons and equipment needed for the Kingslayer formation. It was better to be safe than sorry. In order to join the war against the Emperor, the dwarves had made a lot of preparations. The so-called Kingslayer formation was a formation that was specially designed to kill an emperor. Previously, although Dwarf Island had lost an investigation team to the Emperor, they had also obtained some information about the Emperor's abilities. Combining it with the information passed down from ancient times, the dwarves made repeated deductions, and finally finalized the details of the Kingslayer formation. The most important part was the weapons and equipment that the dwarves had prepared for the Kingslayer. On the head of each Chocobo, there was a specially made holy emblem of Stim. In the great temple of Dwarf Island, they had been enshrined for almost 100 years. The power of faith had permeated every atom of these metal creations, and a normal priest only needed to hold one of these holy emblems to be able to cast high-level divine spells. When these holy emblems were set up in the city matrix, the amplification effect of divine spells was terrifying. Without a doubt, in order to maximize the effectiveness of the holy emblems, the people who used them were naturally the electric monks present. As the first batch of Ramsey humans who believed in the god of virtual games, STEM, every lightning monk was an excellent priest. Their minds were connected with the gods, so using divine spells was as easy as eating and drinking for them. Before the Emperor's counterattack, the 6 lightning monks had already hidden behind the heavy protection of the Chocobo riders. Each of them was surrounded by 12 Chocobo riders and had 12 holy emblems at their disposal. Fantasy descent, perfect mirror image. Due to their race, almost every dwarf god would more or less have a clergy in the field of illusion, and the god of virtual games STEM was no exception. His priests could also communicate with the field of illusion and cast very powerful illusion spells. For example, this strange divine spell called Perfect Mirror Image. By constructing a perfect mirror image, the spellcaster could temporarily duplicate a mirror image that was exactly the same as the target. Although there was a time limit to the existence of these mirror images, they had the same ability as the subject during their time of existence. Originally, for a powerful creature like the Emperor, ordinary priests would not be able to create a perfect mirror image, even if they tried their best. But this group of lightning monks, firstly, used the holy emblems to amplify the effect of their divine spells. Secondly, they worked together to cast the spell, so each of them only needed to complete 1/6 of the perfect mirror image. So, in the end, they still summoned an illusion that was exactly the same as the Emperor. The illusion had a time limit, so as soon as it appeared, the lightning monks gave it a death order. Attack the real body, use any ability that can hurt him without limit. Do your best to inflict heavy damage on him, don't worry about other problems. The mirror image of the Emperor looked up to the sky and roared. Its 2 front hooves were raised high, and then it landed heavily on the ground of the arena. Many of the knights who had just fallen off their horses were slightly bounced up from the bumpy ground. The mirror image actually reached out its palm to those people, just like what the Emperor had done just now. It actually quickly absorbed the souls and vitality of those injured and turned them into its own spellcasting energy. Many of the knights present were dumbfounded by what they saw. They were amazed at the huge monster that the dwarves had summoned that was exactly the same as the Emperor, but at the same time, they were secretly alarmed by the dwarves' actions. Those guys, Grim was helped up by his subordinate, Paladin Tom. He took off his deformed iron helmet and looked at what the perfect illusion had done. He gritted his teeth and said, "They don't care about the life and death of us Ramses at all." Some of the knights around him also had the same thought, but none of them chose to say it out loud like Grim. But at this moment, everyone understood one thing, and that was, those who are not of our race must have different intentions. Looking at his own perfect mirror image, the Emperor was stunned for a moment, and then he grinned coldly. He switched his fine gold spear to his left hand, and then stretched out his right hand, repeating the same actions as the mirror image. And this time, the target of his absorption was not limited to those injured knights. Some of the mechanical Chocobo riders who were guarding around the lightning monks were also affected. Many of the dwarves directly turned into ashes in the cockpit. "You want to compete? Ha 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 ha." The Emperor laughed maniacally and blasted the energy gathered in his hand at his mirror image. Seeing this, the mirror image didn't do anything to deal with the energy. Instead, it used the most primitive magic power to bombard its destined opponent. The 2 emperors, one real and one fake, began to fight in the arena. The energy they released was so violent that after contact, they were stuck in a stalemate, eroding and annihilating each other. In an instant, the arena was swept up by a gust of wind, and sand and stones flew. "He's been tricked." Attack. Seeing that the Emperor and his mirror image were engaged in a war of attrition, Freya Ironbeard immediately announced his second order. The mechanical chocobo riders are mounted on heavy armor-piercing bullets, and fire in a roundabout way. In an instant, the mechanical chocobos that seemed to be guarding the lightning monk to the death scattered in all directions. The dwarf pilot controlled the mount to circle behind the Emperor, and black gun barrels protruded from the front of the mechanical chocobo's chest. Vroom vroom vroom, the motor started, and the heavy armor-piercing bullets were pushed into the barrel, and a torrent of metal instantly poured down on the Emperor. The battle to kill the Emperor had officially begun. Chapter 7:23. The core of the Kingslaying plan was to restrain the Emperor, but that was not the entire plan. The dwarf island was fully aware of the strength of the ancient ruler of Ramsey, so they did not place their hopes on just one path. After the lightning monks had summoned their perfect mirror images and used a wave counter to restrain the Emperor, the pygmy riders who were piloting the robotic chocobos immediately pulled out their trump card. They began to attempt to destroy their opponent with a storm of firepower. Steel-core armor-piercing bullets continuously shot out from the muzzles, hitting the dark purple scales. One or two bullets might not have any effect, but with hundreds and thousands of bullets fired at the same time, even the Emperor's thick skin would not be able to withstand the torrent of steel. The bullets shattered the scales and embedded themselves in the flesh. Flowers of blood began to bloom on the Emperor's body. From the wounds, a dark green liquid, either blood or tissue, flowed out, solidifying and hardening at a speed visible to the naked eye to repair the wounds. Abyss of vengeance. In pain, the Emperor waved the fine gold spear in his left hand, summoning a large magic circle that covered the entire arena. The power formed by his hatred distorted reality, and any opponent who dared to look down on his power was bound by this resentment. Including the mechanical chocobo riders, almost everyone's movements were temporarily restricted by the abyss of vengeance. Even the lightning monks tried to use divine spells to dispel the effects of the spell, but in the end it was useless. "You pathetic playthings, you can't hurt me!" The Emperor opened his mouth full of fangs and declared loudly. At the same time, he raised the fine gold spear and threw it with all his might at the perfect mirror image that was facing off against him. However, the opponent was clearly prepared. The mirror image clenched its empty hand, and a large amount of dirt and gravel rose up in an instant, forming a fist made entirely of rock. Stone fist. The mirror image waved its arm with all its might, and the rock fist flew out in an instant, hitting the fine gold spear accurately. As soon as they came into contact, the stone fist shattered into pieces with a "paw" sound, but it also knocked the fine gold spear away. However, the Emperor now had his left hand free. He clenched his fist, and once again absorbed the life and soul energy of a group of people in the arena, forming another violent and primitive magic power that directly bombarded his opponent. Rumble! The mirror image couldn't dodge in time and was directly hit by the Emperor. However, since it was known as the perfect mirror image, it naturally had something unusual about it. Within 1/5 of an hourglass, it had the same ability as the Emperor. Therefore, although the damage caused by the torrent of magic power caused serious damage to the mirror image, and there was a penetrating wound from its chest to its back, it still didn't fall down. A large amount of dark green liquid gushed out from the wound to repair itself. "It's surprisingly difficult to deal with," the Emperor thought to himself as he looked at the stubborn mirror image. Now that the battle was over, he swung his right arm, which was burning hot. Then, he turned around and pounced on himself. He knew himself best. The Emperor had a clear understanding of his own body's abilities. After all, this was the body that he had slowly transformed from the demon grave. As such, he knew that ordinary magic techniques would be useless against his enemies. Its huge hooves stomped on the ground, creating a rumbling sound and sending up a cloud of dust. The Emperor waved his claws and rushed forward, wanting to use a more primitive method to decide the victor. Inferior imitation, I'm going to tear you to pieces. The two behemoths collided with each other and made a muffled bang sound. Like a shrew fighting, they actually began to tear at each other in the martial arts arena. However, every attack was incomparably fierce and vicious. The Emperor relied on his body's strong recovery ability, and his perfect mirror image was simply not afraid of death. Piercing the throat, gouging the heart, attacking the kidney, all kinds of moves were used one after another. Scales and flesh flew everywhere, and the sand in the arena was dyed green. However, although the perfect mirror image could copy almost all of the Emperor's abilities, the fighting skills that the Emperor had mastered through training were not in the list of copied skills. On the muddy sand, the Emperor raised his foot and stomped heavily on the mirror image's chest, causing it to stagger. Then, he pounced on the mirror image, using his body weight to suppress the mirror image. His two arms were like pile drivers, hitting the mirror image's head repeatedly. His sharp claws pierced through the mirror image's skull and eyes. After a dozen heavy blows, the mirror image's head was beaten red and white, and it was impossible to recognize its original form. Even if the mirror image had strong recovery ability, and would not die even if its head was crushed, it would not be able to fight for a short period of time. And once the summoning period was over, this perfect mirror image would also dissipate. Retreat to the Grey Tower, activate the second battle plan. Freya Ironbeard climbed out of the Velociraptor's cockpit and shouted to the dwarf chocobo riders. Because they were trapped by the abyss of resentment, their mounts were all motionless. Lightning Monk summoning divine spell, remove the evil fire seal outside the arena. At this time, the Emperor had basically finished off his perfect mirror image. He raised one of his legs and crushed the head that looked exactly like him. Want to escape? It's not that easy, however. Before he could finish his sentence, a curved horn suddenly pierced through his chest. What? The Emperor looked back in shock, only to see a monster that was as large as himself suddenly appeared beside him. The battle between us is not over yet. Covered in long brown hair, the monster had the upper body of a Goliath warrior on top of a mastodon body. When he spoke, he had a thick double accent. I am Tango, the Shattering Bearhead. I have been ordered to take your life. That's right, Broken Bear Head Tango was the product of a broken bear head and a tango piece together. While the Emperor was busy fighting with his mirror image, Keys let the Goliath warrior walk to the mastodon that was pierced by a fine gold spear. Because the flesh of a Leviathan creature was implanted, the tango would not die from this injury. Moreover, it also had a special ability, which was to temporarily share a body with other creatures through the fusion of flesh and blood to engage in battle. Purely in terms of physical strength, the mastodon tango was much stronger than a normal creature. It was just that it lacked skill, and it mostly relied on instinct when it fought. And as a Goliath warrior, although the broken bear head did not lack skill, it lacked strength in front of a monster like the Emperor. Therefore, Quest allowed them to temporarily combine and engage in a battle against the enemy. And this was also the final preparation for Keys's appearance. The young blue dragon felt that the Emperor's visit to the arena might be a good opportunity for him. Chapter 724. Modulating and Transforming Creatures? Chimeras? Seeing the appearance of Broken Bear Head Tango, the Emperor roughly guessed what the other party was. And it was precisely because of this that he was surprised. Other than me, Ramsay actually has someone who can do this technical work? Ignoring his exclamation, the fused half-Goliath mastodon quickly raised its head, and the tusk that pierced through the Emperor's chest flew out together with him, tearing off a large piece of flesh and blood. Broken Bear Head Tango's strength at this time was far beyond that of an ordinary Goliath. But he knew very well that if he couldn't use his physical strength to suppress the opponent, then he wouldn't be a match for the Emperor. The opponent's powerful spellcasting ability, if fully unleashed, was enough to make him regret on the spot countless times. Therefore, after using the Leviathan Mastodon's phase transition ability to successfully sneak attack, he made up his mind to use his skillful combat skills to restrain the Emperor and engage in close combat with him. Only in this way could he eliminate some of the power gap between the two. "Eat my fist!" Broken Bear Head Tango roared. The Leviathan's cell tissue differentiated and deformed, and his fist quickly grew a thick layer of cuticle and quickly sharpened into the shape of a drill. Facing the aggressive attack, the Emperor's eyelids wrinkled slightly, and then he crossed his arms from bottom to top, half pushing and half pushing the jab over his head. Then, instead of retreating, he stepped forward and crashed into the opponent's arms. All close combat skills were essentially the interaction of forces. As long as he entered the range of the opponent's arms, then the moment he could rely on to swing his limbs would be smaller, and he would only be able to exert 10% or 20% of his strength in the end. Good thinking. Catching the Emperor's charge, Broken Bear Head Tango's 4 elephant legs plowed several gullies in the sand. But he wasn't the slightest bit annoyed, because wrestling with the enemy in close combat was the strength of the Goliath race. What's more, his body after fusing with the Leviathan Mastodon had many magical abilities. Tusk Xidigarba. Silently mobilizing the Leviathan's power in his body, Broken Bear Head Tango immediately launched a counterattack. On the shoulders, chest, and arms of the half-Goliath Mastodon, a large number of sharp horns that resembled mastodon tusks suddenly grew out. They formed a barrier with spikes in front of him. The Emperor, who was caught off guard, was instantly pierced through multiple times. The dark green body fluid flowed freely, but the Emperor did not cry out in pain as usual. It was as if he did not care how serious his injuries were. Interesting. It's a pity that you're not strong enough. With a flip of his hands, he gripped Shattered Bear Head Tango's shoulder tightly. Life-soul absorption. The Emperor cracked open his mouth, revealing an exceptionally ferocious smile. The half-Goliath Mastodon's body suddenly trembled, and its knees went soft. Fortunately, it did not directly kneel on the ground. Vigorous life force, how tenacious! Feeling the power transmitted from his palm to his body, the Emperor praised in his heart, but that was all. In just a few moments, this powerful chimera before him would be reduced to ashes like most of the enemies he had faced before, dissipating into nothingness. However, he did not expect that there would be someone in this arena who had the ability to launch an attack on him. If that's all you've got, then death will surely befall you. Along with a soft murmur, a sharp pain suddenly appeared on the Emperor's neck. His evil technique that was draining souls and life force was interrupted. Like a real assassin, Keys quietly appeared behind the Emperor. He jumped out of the shadows, holding 2 obsidian daggers in his hands. In a flash, he pierced the back of the Emperor's neck, and the daggers disappeared. This was a technique used by the assassins of the Ash World to deal with black-robed mages. As long as the obsidian daggers that could store magic power were pierced into the magic hub of the caster, then the caster's ability to cast spells could be restricted. Even if the black-robed mages were not as powerful as the ancient soul-binding mages, and even if the Emperor had magic attainments that far exceeded the ancient soul-binding mages of the Ash World, they were still casters of the same system, and the principles of their spells were the same. And Keys, through his previous observation, had already discovered several magic hubs on the Emperor's body. When the Emperor was in close combat with the half-Goliath Mastodon, he suddenly attacked and cut the vital part of the back of the Emperor's neck. In order to ensure that the obsidian daggers would not be pulled out, Keys not only used a little more strength to ensure that the daggers sank into the Emperor's flesh. Before he retreated, he took out a small hammer, and hammer smashed it on the wound. Sensing its master's intention, the Dragon-Head Warhammer immediately mobilized the power of the Mice Energy Nucleus and, considerately, cast 3 types of buff spells that would not trigger any defensive spells. Efficient Healing, Steel Skin, and Force Field Shield, sealing the 2 daggers from the inside out. If the emperor did not directly break his neck in half, then he would have to obediently use counterspells to remove the 3 layers of protection layer by layer, and then he could take out the obsidian daggers. And no matter what he did, it would take up most of his energy, and Keys could now attack him. "You're looking for your own death." Hearing the emperor's twisted neck, Keys could not help but laugh out loud. "The last guy who said that to me, the grass on his grave was already 10 feet tall." He shook his wrist, and the dragon head warhammer immediately turned into a horse-slaying sword. He stomped heavily on the sand of the arena, and a large piece of soil was sent flying as if it was bombed by a cannonball. Then he twisted his waist, swung the weapon in his hand, and fiercely slashed at the emperor's pillar-like hind leg. Slash! Bang! The first sound was the tearing of muscles and fascia, and the second sound was the breaking of the leg bones. Although Keys's slash did not split the emperor's leg in half, the force of the smash made the emperor stagger and fall to the ground. "There's no need to talk about chivalry with this crooked path, let's kill him together," Keys roared. Everyone who was still standing on the arena heard him, and they immediately reacted to the current situation, and everyone's spirits were lifted. "Bring the heavy machine gun over, shoot this monster to death." This was the order given by the dwarf elder who originally wanted to retreat to the Grey Tower. "Use the flail and spike to tear that demon to shreds." This was the roar given by the mayor of Emerald Wood City, Green. 2 of Tom's paladins also summoned their holy power, waving their shining white swords as they rushed over. Seeing this, a few of the lightning monks also began to pray to their gods, wanting to use divine spells on the emperor who fell for the first time. Chapter 725. Without any hesitation, everyone joined in to beat up the drowning dog. No, the fallen emperor. This did not surprise Keys. After all, the leader of the monsters was the enemy of all the creatures in Ramsey. However, they did not care about the emperor's thoughts. He was somewhat dissatisfied with the previous situation. "You bunch of ignorant slaves, how dare you offend your superiors and murder your master?" The emperor who had fallen to the ground roared. In the eyes of some philosophers, the operation of the universe depended on the balance of 4 forces. They were charm, persuasion, uncertainty, and cruelty. Therefore, the reason why the emperor could always think of himself as Ramsey's master was because he believed that his charm was amazing. Cruelty gave him the ability to rule over the monster army. And because of the first 2, he thought that he could persuade the knights present. Unfortunately, he ignored the factor of uncertainty. Therefore, in the end, he could not persuade those people. Swords, halberds, chain hammers, heavy machine gun bullets, and divine spells were all thrown at the emperor. Although many of the attacks could not break through the defense of the scales on his body, and if the attackers were too close, they could be torn apart by the angry emperor. However, the factor of uncertainty played a role again. Many ants could kill an elephant, and in the end, the emperor was still injured. Unlike when the dwarves tried to kill the king, the emperor now had 2 obsidian daggers stuck in his neck. Because his magic core was damaged, he now had magic power, but he could not heal himself. After a while, the emperor's patience and dignity were all exhausted. "I, the emperor, will rule this land." He supported his body with his palms and staggered to his feet. At the same time, he swept away the attackers who were constantly harassing him. "Since you have angered me with this kind of behavior, I will not be stingy with my blood." These random words made Keys, who was standing next to him and was ready to give him another vicious blow, frown. The emperor suddenly stretched out his hands and hugged his head. Then, with a strong twist of his arms, the huge head immediately left his body. Just like the undead creatures called flying barbarians, or the life concealment spell that senior mages often used every year, hiding the essence of one's life in a certain part of the body, usually the little finger, so that the mages could cut off the finger to survive a fatal attack. The emperor's head flew straight into the sky. Keyes was just about to intercept the head that left the battlefield without permission, but there was a violent fluctuation of magic nearby. The broken body left in the arena by the Emperor had recovered its vitality because the obsidian daggers had been removed from its neck. Unlike a normal broken body, the headless Emperor's body still had an amazing fluctuation of energy. Even without Keyes's reminder, everyone in the arena noticed the abnormality of the body. A large number of blood vessels suddenly burst out from its surface, like pipes, piercing into the gravel of the arena and constantly pumping green blood. "Get out of here!" In place of the bewildered Alliance Army's Commander-in-Chief Green, Keyes issued a strict order, regardless of whether the other party would disagree. "Tell the citizens of Emeraldwood City, if they want to live, don't take anything and quickly withdraw to the foot of the mountain." Then, he glanced at the broken bear head Tango that had just climbed up from the ground, and then pointed to the flame barrier outside the arena. The half-Goliath mastodon immediately reacted, and then took a step forward and rushed directly to the flame wall. As he ran, he also brought a large amount of soil with him. Like a wave, it swept layer by layer toward the flame wall outside the arena. The strange green flame was temporarily suppressed by the soil. Like a pie that had been bitten by someone, a gap appeared. "Withdraw from this gap." Broken Bear Head Tango's loud voice almost spread throughout the entire Emeraldwood City, shaking the heads of the knights wearing helmets, but not many of them complained. Those who could still move all pulled the wounded people around them and quickly withdrew from the dangerous place through the passage. Those who had a good relationship with the dead would try their best to bring the bodies of their companions. Outside the arena, at this time, was already surrounded by the troops of Dwarf Island and Emeraldwood City. Many alchemists and dwarf researchers were also gathered here, busy concocting potions that could be used to extinguish the green evil fire. When Green and Freya Ironbeard respectively appeared in their respective army formations, they immediately commanded the troops to start the evacuation and rescue work, without any delay. Not long after, only Keyes and the 6 lightning monks were still in the arena. The lightning monks looked at Keyes, who was circling the Emperor's headless corpse, and finally one of them asked, "Who are you? Why did you let Emeraldwood City withdraw from here?" "A demigod will be born in this place soon." Keyes did not answer the lightning monk's question, but still focused on the Emperor's corpse that was constantly pumping blood into the depths of the earth. "According to my estimation, he should be a kind of distorted social god." The so-called social god was actually an ancient mysterious soul from another world. Thousands of years ago, the gods created social gods as guardians to provide shelter for those natural beings who were unable to protect themselves. The social gods had amazing adaptability. When the natural beings they guarded changed, the social gods would also change their forms. There were countless social gods in the world, theoretically speaking. Animals, plants, inanimate objects, and even some specific places could be watched by a specific social god. The most powerful social gods were called the Great God. These mysterious and unique creatures had amazing power, and their strength could even be compared to demigods or even higher divine beings. Due to the nature of protection, there were very few creatures that belonged to the evil alignment. But the Emperor, through reverse research of this god's creation, and then invented a way to create distorted social gods. In fact, the headless corpse he left here was originally the life essence of the strongest calamity general created by him in ancient times, the Earth God. After he temporarily gave up this body, the calamity general regained autonomy, and the Earth God began to automatically regenerate. And the first thing he had to do was to soak his blood in this land and use this land as his goal of defense. Because the Earth God was a real demigod, Keyes really had no way to stop his revival for the time being. He could only let the people of Emeraldwood City, who lived on this land, quickly evacuate to avoid being punished by a god. Unless Keyes immediately turned into his original form and erased all of this land, he might be able to delay the awakening of the Earth God. But in that case, Emerald Wood City would still be destroyed. In any case, those ordinary citizens had to evacuate quickly if they wanted to live. Chapter 726. Kneeling on the ground and communicating with the god of virtual games that he believed in, an electric monk stood up and explained the contents of the oracle to his companions. A god is not something that mortals can face directly, even if he is only a demigod. They then walked out of the arena to assist the troops of Dwarf Island in quickly evacuating Emerald Wood, which was already on the verge of death, without any hesitation. Looking at the actions of the Stim priests, Keys couldn't help but shake his head. Unreliable guys, he thought to himself. It's as if they were carved out of the same mold as their master. Every single one of them is unreliable. Of course, Keys didn't intend to be a hero and turn the tide. After all, he was also a megalosaurus that was lawful and evil. Without enough benefits, he would never choose to stand out. In addition, the god of society that was about to appear would definitely bring more pressure to the Ramsey people who had been having a smooth time recently. This might make it easier for him to carry out his next plan. With enough pressure, the Ramsey people can focus on the trouble in front of them and not be afraid of the reinforcements that I've found for them. Keys had already made up his mind. Once the Emperor and the dwarves brought enough pressure to the Ramsey people, he would use the bandits that the Scale of Perpetual Order had recently captured as raw materials to open and stabilize the next portal to the island world. He would let the Camel people and Polar Bear warriors who had been trained for a long time come to the rich world of Ramsey and start a colonial war. He would only rely on the forces he had built in Ramsey itself. Firstly, it wouldn't be enough to deal with the Emperor who had revealed more and more of his trump cards, as well as the Stim who had yet to appear. Secondly, he would be held back by the Ramsey people most of the time. Only by engaging in a true planar war, cutting the Gordian knot with a swift sword, can those two be pacified as soon as possible, lest undue delay brings trouble. After half a day of evacuation, all the residents of Emerald Wood City, as well as the civilians of Soft Maple City, had evacuated to the empty field at the foot of the mountain. It was already late at night, and under the mountain wind, many of the old, weak, sick, and disabled were shivering from the cold. Some people wanted to start a fire to get some warmth, but the city guards were patrolling all the time. "I'm freezing to death." Old Bobby took a sip of honey wine. The hot alcohol made him feel a little better. He wrapped the leather jacket on his body tightly. New North Wind Tavern, what a good name. It's over. There were quite a few people who were just as melancholy as he was, because they would be mercilessly taken away by the guards if they cried out loud. There were only soft sobbing sounds that rose and fell one after another. Bring out a few 100 pounds of dry food and dried meat from the milkhouse. Give half of it to the citizens, including those from Soft Maple City. Let the knights guard the remaining half with their sword. Lying on a soft cushion, even though he felt sore all over his body, he still insisted on dealing with it and issued some orders that must be carried out. "Don't bother about those midgets, they have plenty of canned herring." As he spoke, Glenn picked up a few unopened tin cans on the low table beside him and threw them into the corner of the tent. When he retreated before, he put down his face to ask for help from the midgets, but he only got these specially provided food in exchange. Not only was the amount pitifully little, but the smell was simply like rotten eggs that had been sealed for hundreds of years. It was unbearable. Just after he vented his anger, he narrowed his eyes and rested for a moment. An attendant hurriedly opened the tent curtain in a hurry. He rushed in and reported loudly, "Sir, Mr. Keys has come out of the city. Let him come quickly." Glenn sat up straight from the cushion and immediately said loudly, "Let the chef bring bacon, wine, and bread. Although the conditions are limited, we can't neglect our friends." Not long after, the travel-worn Keys walked into Glenn's tent. He smelled a special smell when he walked in. Thanks to the excellent sense of smell of the Megalosaurus race, He immediately found the source of the smell. Canned herring. Walking to the corner of the tent, he saw a few tin cans covered by grass and wood ashes. He bent down and picked them up. He carefully looked at the inscription on them, produced by the Third Ocean Food Factory on Dwarf Island. Quickly help Mr. Keyes throw away those dirty things. Glenn looked at Keyes's actions with a shy expression on his face. He quickly ordered the attendant. However, Keyes refused the attendants who wanted to take the cans from his hands. Instead, he put the cans into a leather bag that he carried with him. Now Emeraldwood City may be in some trouble. Presumably, you have learned the specific situation from the midgets, Stim's priest. Because he did not know how to address the lightning monks, Keyes could only replace it with a certain statement. Emeraldwood City may be in the same situation as Soft Maple City. They both need to move to another place. It's best to move as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the terrible landlord god revives, the ordinary citizens will have absolutely no chance of survival. Hearing Keyes's words, Glenn showed a bitter smile. I also know that what you said is correct, but at present, the number of civilians in Emeraldwood City, including the civilians of Soft Maple City who migrated here before, is close to 100,000 people. And a large number of them, because they retreated in a hurry, they did not bring much food and clothing, I'm afraid. Lack of food and clothing is not terrible, Keyes interrupted Glenn's words. The scale of perpetual order can provide assistance in this regard. At least, it can guarantee that 100,000 of you will need to eat for the next few days, although we can only provide canned food. While he was talking to the mayor of Emeraldwood City, a Leviathan airship suddenly came out of the clouds. The Leviathan warship that Keyes originally brought had evolved into the appearance of an airship. Many kobold pilots of the Dragonborn clan were constantly correcting the route at this time. They had to reach the exact location, judge the wind direction, and calculate the speed of the airship before they could put down the airdrop. During the previous battle in the Acid Fog Canyon, a large number of insect canned meat were produced in Traction City. They had been piled up in Keyes' warehouse for a long time. When Quest was advising Glenn to evacuate from Emeraldwood City, he had already anticipated that the evacuation would be troublesome. Therefore, he specifically sent a message to Magic Advisor Snade to inform the Demolic to open a portal and transport the canned insect meat over. Chapter 727. The Leviathan airship stabilized a few hundred feet above the clouds. The sky was a cold, bright blue. The clouds in the middle of the night were no longer as unreachable as during the day, nor were they as sticky and cold as in the evening. Instead, they were like a white wool carpet, spreading out in all directions. The peaks of the mountains were like isolated islands in the sea of clouds. Look at the predictor in front of you. The one in charge of the airdrop was Shay, a survivor of the Wonder Craftsman clan. Because this was a job that required mathematics and manipulation skills, it had to be led by an engineering expert before the Dragonborn clan kobold pilots could successfully complete it. 40 kobolds were divided into 2 rows and lined up on both sides of the lower cabin. In front of them were large crates wrapped in tentacles that grew out of the Leviathan's body. On top of each crate was something that looked like a crock, and there was a fuse outside. The so-called predictor was actually a special organ that was separated from the Leviathan. Its appearance was like a full-cover diving goggle connected to a rope. The kobold pilots could wear it on their faces, and the outside of the airship could clearly appear in front of their eyes. When the beacon is launched, a bull's eye and a white dot will appear on your predictor. Shay described the operation process in concise words. The white dot represents the airdrop in front of you, and what you have to do is to hold them in front of you and adjust slightly to ensure that the white dot in the predictor can be circled into the bull's eye, and then ignite the fuse. Do you understand? Shay asked again. After receiving a loud and neat affirmative response, he nodded. The Leviathan airship is hovering, the beacon has been launched, prepare for the airdrop. According to his previous instructions, all the kobolds of the Dragon Clan completed the calibration and ignition command. The tentacles wrapped around the crates quickly let go. At the same time, the Leviathan organization on the deck of the lower cabin suddenly shrank and opened up many holes. The crates full of canned insect meat almost simultaneously leaked out of those holes and landed on the ground. In midair, as the fuse burned with a sizzling sound, it finally sank into the crock that was firmly tied to the crate. 40 slight explosions sounded in a row, the sealed oil mud collapsed, and 40 small gas elementals floated out of the crock. After being stuck in the jar for so long, the air elementals were a little annoyed. They drove their power upwards, wanting to escape from the jar. However, even though those jars were low-level magic items, it wasn't a problem to restrain them. This way, with the help of the small air elementals that didn't have much intelligence and through their constant struggle, even the crate tied to the bottom of the jar was able to gain a strong lift. The originally free-falling object was first slowed down and then fell at a constant speed. As they got closer and closer to the ground and further away from the sky, the strength of the air elementals also became weaker and weaker. Finally, all of the small air elementals ran out of strength and were once again captured by the binding array in the jar. Plug those jars with clay. Standing in the middle of the forest, Keyes said to some of the Emerald Wood City defenders dispatched by Green. They had all witnessed the slatted chest falling from the sky, and they were also carrying 1 or 2 pieces of soft mud that had just been dug out from the river bank. Upon hearing Keyes's order, they immediately carried it out. Some of the braver ones even sneaked a peek at the contents of the jars. However, these ordinary people could only see the silhouettes of the air elementals and could only hear the buzzing sound. These jars were not disposable items. After the guards pasted mud on the jars, they were all collected by the desert elf Brock on a mule cart, neatly stacked and then pulled away. The rest of the guards started to deal with the crates. The Leviathan airship dropped 40 slatted chests in one airdrop. These crates were unusual. Each of them was comparable in size to a civilian house, and they were filled with canned insect meat. Straw was stuffed between the gaps of the canned food. The soldiers of Emerald Wood City spent a lot of effort, and in the end, they even used axes and halberds to split the nails on the crates. Then, they transported the canned food to the mule carts that had already been parked there. The soldiers that were able to form 2 phalanxes took nearly an hourglass to complete the loading and unloading work. Originally, they had prepared 60 mule carts, but in the end, they found that it was not enough. They had to send people to the supply camp to bring 20 more carts. Keyes, in the name of the Scale of Perpetual Order, provided more than 30 tons of canned insect meat to Emerald Wood City at one time. Of course, he kept the raw materials of the canned food a secret. He did not mention the acid mistworm, but only said that it was white meat that was pickled with some kind of sea fish. Looking at the soldiers using swords and daggers to break open the canned food, pouring it into containers such as wooden barrels, and then distributing food to the hungry citizens, Glenn finally breathed a sigh of relief. At least this meal can be eaten, and these people may listen to the evacuation order. Emerald Wood City Mayor thought for a moment but still asked, "Mr. Keyes, why is there still no movement in the city?" Is it possible, as if to deliberately extinguish the hope in his heart, the earth suddenly began to tremble, and the gravel on the ground began to tap dance? In the distance, the mountain ridge where Emerald Wood City was located, suddenly issued a thunder-like sound. Then, everyone at the foot of the mountain saw an unforgettable scene, including Emerald Wood City. The whole mountain range was uprooted in an instant, separated from the original mountain peak, and turned into a huge creature composed of piles of rocks and plants. "Omo Ray," saw Gu, Note 2. His chiseled face trembled slowly, and he made a declaration that sounded like the echoes of a valley. Standing next to the already stunned Glenn, Keyes carefully listened to the Earth language spoken by the Earth God. "Scepter, where?" At the same time, He also explained to Glenn what the Earth God said, but the other side did not pay attention to his translation. The Earth God stamped his feet, and the earth within a radius of more than 10 miles shook even more violently. He stretched his thick arm behind his back and grabbed a white tower-like object. It was originally a watchtower of the Glenn family's milk house, and then pulled it out by the roots. The watchtower, made of white marble, was instantly covered with a layer of metallic luster. La Ken, Sai Ko, propping his newly crafted scepter on the ground, as if it was a crutch, the landlord god glanced at the distant townsfolk, who were hiding in the open field at the foot of the mountain and were now trembling in fear. Then, he actually turned around and left. The island sank. Silently interpreting the Earth language, Keyes turned his head to look at the dwarfs dozens of miles away. Presumably, those guys should also have seen the scene of the Earth God's resurrection. And if they understood his words, their faces would be ashen. Chapter 728. Tonight, the moon was full and bright, hanging high in the clear night sky dotted with stars. Under the gentle moonlight, Emerald Wood Peak stretched out toward the sky. During the day, the sunlight would illuminate the granite peaks purplish red and rusty color. However, under the moonlight, they all transformed into tall and proud ghosts, appearing lonely and cold. The north of the mountain range was surrounded by forests. Giant oak and linden trees covered the sky, extending from the foot of the mountain to the seaside. Dozens of miles to the east was a somewhat desolate black swamp, but it only looked that way. Although it was a land full of mud, river bends, and stagnant water, there were also hills and fertile soil suitable for farming. Black Willow City was located there. As one of Green's staunch allies, the mayor of Black Willow City had personally experienced Emerald Wood City's night of destruction and felt the same way. He generously decided to open up several pieces of floating land that had just been confirmed on the border of Black Willow City. This was another name for some land in the swamp, where construction or planting could be carried out and where it was more suitable for human habitation, to accommodate the Green family that had temporarily migrated from Emerald Wood City, as well as the city's civilians that had followed Green and his subordinates in exile. Since the crisis had passed half a month ago, apart from a few Green family fiefs and Emerald Wood City's satellite towns, there were not many inhabited villages left in the vicinity of the ruins of Emerald Wood City. Following the migration of the city's residents, many small settlements were abandoned. The people living in those places fully displayed the wisdom of the common people, and followed their lords as they migrated. The present Emerald Wood Peak, because of the powerful awakening of the god of Earth, had a large chunk of the fortress-like solid rock body along with Emerald Wood City on top had been directly cleaved off, leaving only a circular valley. Surrounding this huge bowl-shaped pit was a series of steep, dome-shaped hills. Coupled with the surrounding towering mountain range, it appeared particularly abrupt. In a short period of more than half a month, the trees certainly did not have enough time to grow. The land in the middle of this ring of hills was barren. Only some weeds and knotted vines could be seen. In the center of the ring of hills, there was a protruding rock hill bare like a dwarf's head. The hill rose abruptly and formed a gentle slope at the highest point. It did look like the head of a humanoid creature. Before the civilians of Emerald Wood City evacuated, many people had noticed this, but no one had mentioned it to the owner of this place. They were either not brave enough, not strong enough, or not rash enough. On the flat top of the rocky hill there was a tower that seemed to be made out of mortar. It was tall and majestic, and it easily crossed the surrounding hills. Under the moonlight, it faintly revealed a trace of dim light. The tower was completely silent, because the dwarves who had built this gray tower and stationed here for a short period of time had already left. However, the sound of boots gently scraping against the stone broke the silence. Under the gentle moonlight, a figure flashed by, casting shadows on the surrounding ground and rocks. A linen cloak fluttered in the cool night breeze. With a creaking sound, the door of the gray tower opened slightly on its hinges. The man in the cloak cursed in a low voice, then took out a small silver pot from his bosom and poured some alchemical lubricant into the hinges. The grease soaked the rusty hinges, making it easier to open. The intruder smiled. At this time, the interior of the gray tower was empty, and the only remaining tools were all destroyed and abandoned. The intruder was as quiet as a phantom. He took out an astrolabe from his pocket that looked like it had been crushed, but in fact it was not. Its dial had been shattered, and the needle on it had been twisted. This piece of metal lay lifelessly in the intruder's hand, as if it was useless. However, when the intruder fiddled with the knob on the side of the astrolabe, a room appeared in the hall at the bottom of the gray tower. The intruder passed through the room and walked up the steps that led to the underground chamber. He walked down more than 10 yards in a zigzag manner and came to a large iron door. Then he took out the astrolabe again and opened the door. "You're a little late. I could only ride a horse to the foot of the mountain, then climb up bit by bit using the vines. This is the letter from the mayor." The intruder, or more accurately, the person who took the lead, took out a letter sealed with red wax from his bosom and handed it to the other party. "He's willing to cooperate with us." After skimming through the contents of the letter, the lightning monk who was hiding in his hooded robe nodded. Then, he said to the mercenary leader who came to deliver the letter, "And you're his agent, as always." As he spoke, a bolt of lightning suddenly shot out from the lightning monk's fingertips. Caught off guard, the mercenary leader was hit and fell to the ground. Given the current situation, we are about to start a full-scale war with the Emperor's monster army. So His Holiness Stim has decided to spread the faith among the Ramsey humans in order to get more qualified warriors and magic spellcasters. The mayor of Soft Maple has agreed to be the first batch of experimental subjects, but according to Ramsey's tradition, as the Lord, he can let you take his place. Looking at the mercenary leader who had fallen to the ground with a stiff body, the lightning monk explained to him. Then, he bent down and stretched out his hand to grab the collar of the experimental subject and walked to the virtual game sanctuary in the basement. Unlike the Stim's house on Dwarf Island, this place was not the relaxed and cheerful style of entertainment commonly seen among dwarves. Instead, it was somewhat similar to the temples of various gods in Ramsey's human society. The decorations were all to highlight solemnity and dignity. However, because this virtual game sanctuary was opened underground, it was somewhat gloomy and scary. "Do you want me to be a snake?" Because his body was stiff, the mercenary leader's words were slurred. In the process of being dragged, he saw dozens of lightning monks walking around in the sacred abode. Those people, let's call them that for the time being, were like ghouls crawling out of their graves without any signs of life. They just wandered back and forth between small quiet rooms built with long stone slabs. Whenever someone walked in, a strange light would flash in those quiet rooms. The lightning monk pushed the mercenary leader to the door of a small quiet room. Only then did he see that the long stone slabs seemed to be engraved with patterns. Strange big birds, he thought, and the next moment, he was pushed into the quiet room. Soaring sea and land adventure. Seeing the light in the quiet room and hearing the sound of struggling being replaced by steady breathing, the lightning monk nodded with satisfaction. It's suitable for rookies who are new to virtual games. It can stimulate their insatiable desire to play. Chapter 729. By the time the mercenary leader walked out of the quiet room, 3 hourglasses had passed. His steps were a little unsteady, and his legs were like a pony with a heavy load tied to them. His ankles and knees couldn't bend at all, and every step he took, he had to make sure that his feet were stepping on solid ground. However, his eyes shone brightly. This kind of light was called never getting tired. "Welcome to the team, my brother." The lightning monk who pushed him into the quiet room was waiting outside at this time. When he saw the mercenary leader come out, he stepped forward and greeted him. The mercenary leader nodded as a greeting in return. However, in the next second, he suddenly thought of something. "You didn't open your mouth to speak," he asked in surprise, "but I heard your voice." Words are very useful, but they can't be expressed clearly by the sound of the mouth. Exploring the path of virtual games, you will encounter large-scale team dungeons and many frequent and efficient communication. However, Ramsey's human language is somewhat limited, so he still didn't see the lightning monk open his mouth, but he directly heard him speak the words of Ra without hindrance. The lightning monk lifted his hood and slowly turned his body, revealing a centipede-like machine entrenched at the back of his neck. "We have all installed psionic power amplifiers," the lightning monk turned his head and continued to explain. "Although it still can't let us use too much psionic power, at least it gives us the ability to communicate telepathically and connect to larger virtual games." Listening to the lightning monk's description, the mercenary leader's eyes shone even more brightly. "I also want to install such a psionic power amplifier." He deliberated for a moment. "I mean, if it doesn't cost too many gem coins. Just now in the quiet room, I flew the aircraft between the sea and the sky to my heart's content, and I felt very comfortable. I think I can't wait to experience more virtual games." "Of course," the lightning monk said, "installing the psionic power amplifier is completely free. As long as you are willing to apply holy oil and announce in front of His Holiness Stim's shrine that you will worship and love him, he will personally activate the psionic ability amplifier for you." Following that, the lightning monk turned to the side and bowed slightly towards the end of the underground sanctuary. There was a shrine of Stim there. Under his guidance, the mercenary leader quickly walked towards the shrine to complete the conversion ritual. His heart was as eager as a shrew who found an earthworm in front of him. With a sizzling sound and a slight tingling sensation, the centipede-shaped psionic power amplifier was connected to the mercenary commander's spine. He could feel a chill at the back of his neck, which made his mind exceptionally clear. The world in his eyes seemed to have been added with a higher definition filter, making it appear exceptionally vivid. Another 5%. The lightning monk, who was in charge of receiving him, thought with satisfaction as he watched the mercenary captain automatically walk to another quiet room after he was inserted into the amplifier. As a priest of Stim, the god of virtual games, if he wanted to unlock a new game dungeon, he would have to pull in enough players to make up for his contribution points. After thinking about his plan, the lightning monk pondered. "I still need 2 more people to unlock the new dungeon. Instead of waiting here, why don't I take the initiative to preach and pull in some more players?" After making up his mind, he knelt in front of Stim's shrine and prayed for a moment. Then, he walked towards an anteroom at the side of the sanctuary, where there was a secret passage that connected to the outside world. Even the weakest god is still a god. Keyes couldn't help but feel a little shocked as he looked at the information on his desk. Half a month ago, the Emperor had enlightened that mountain in Emeraldwood City to become the Earth God. And in just half a month, the Earth God had actually completed his evolution and became a Lord of the Reefs, a water-type subspecies of the Earth God after his normal evolution. He was now entrenched near Dwarf Island, keeping a close eye on the ships and warships that came and went. Every day, he would either raise monstrous waves or expel reef-clawed monsters, armored monsters, and other monsters to attack the island. The dwarf army that Ironbeard Freya had brought to Ramsey had all retreated back to Dwarf Island to deal with the threat posed by the Lord of the Reef. Half a month ago, the Emperor, who had flown away from Emeraldwood City, had used this time to conserve his energy and create a new monster army. In order to obtain enough energy, not only did he open up an active volcano to absorb geothermal heat, he even sent troops to seize several black oil mines that belonged to Red Pine City and obtained large amounts of black oil to feed the Blaze Shadow Beast. Due to the various cities' scorched walls and deserted areas, The Emperor's minions had expanded the range of humans they hunted time and time again in order to obtain more reincarnations. And among those hunting teams, there were reports that the Tribulation General Shurgu seemed to have been resurrected. In short, Ramses' people were now facing a great threat. Although some city-states had already unearthed ancient war weapons that could be used to deal with the generals under the Emperor, after testing, the effects were indeed not bad. With Ramses' current production level, it was impossible to replicate the war weapons designed and manufactured by the engineering goblins on a large scale. Moreover, the storm mech that was supposed to be used to deal with the Emperor was nowhere to be found. In the face of the Emperor's army, the various forces of Ramses were terrified. This fear of war had even infected many of the aristocrats. Many of the wealthy families under the jurisdiction of the Alliance of 5 cities, Emerald Wood, Red Pine, Black Willow, Blue Maple, and Soft Maple, were now packing their belongings and preparing to migrate to cities further south, even if it meant giving up some of their family's property. What's the situation at the Grey Tower? After flipping through the reports on the desk, Keyes walked out of the captain's room and went to the flight deck to get some fresh air. The desert elf, who had been in charge of gathering intelligence since the Bloody War, was by his side. Snader used bird's eye view to investigate that place, and found obvious magical waves beneath the Grey Tower. It's suspected that a large number of divine spells were set up in the basement of the tower. He suspected that the dwarves had built an underground temple in the Grey Tower. Combining all the previous situations, it's very likely that the temple belongs to the god of virtual games, Stim. What's more interesting is that recently, the fat mayor of Soft Maple City has been arranging for his substitute knight to travel between the Grey Tower and the floating land at night. There's definitely something fishy going on here, Keyes knew without even thinking. He said to Brock, in the vicinity of Emerald Wood Peak, apart from the fief of the Grimm family, there should be a rebel force that originally belonged to Harrow entrenched there. Harrow was poisoned to death by the fat mayor of Soft Maple City, and the rebel army should be on the verge of collapse now. Use this information to gain their trust. And then? Brock asked, puzzled. Keyes smiled but did not say anything. Chapter 730. One Eye fell hard on the ground, and the air in his pocket was squeezed out. His hand touched the rough ground, and he realized that he must have fallen on the gravel hill on the side of the ridge. And his brother, Crooked Mouth, was lying not far from him. The veteran bandit and the new black-robed mage, One Eye, got up uneasily. From the air, the situation on the ridge looked like a forest fire. However, from the ground, it looked like the gate of hell had opened. At this moment, the carriages were almost completely engulfed by the flames, and the goods inside were scattered and burned on the ridge. Rolls of cloth were scattered in the mud, broken wine barrels were constantly oozing out liquid, and food was also thrown everywhere. There were many corpses around them, all of which seemed to be humans wearing light armor. He could also see the reflection of helmets and sword. Those must be the guards of the convoy who failed to complete their mission, or the guards of the caravan. One Eye moved his aching shoulder. He felt that his shoulder was only a little bruised, and there were no fractures. In fact, falling from a height of more than 100 feet, even with the sand as a buffer, he should have fallen harder and harder than this. Thanks to the fanatic armor, One Eye patted the high-end product of the scale of perpetual order on his body, and felt a little lucky. His brother should have been worse than him, so he had not recovered yet. But he deserved it. Near the wreckage of the convoy there was a sudden noise. One Eye quickly crouched down and hid behind an overturned board. There was a voice talking in an unfamiliar language. To him, the voice was a little rough, more like a curse. They were looking for him and Crooked Mouth. There was no doubt that they saw them fall from the flying carpet, so they came to search. One Eye saw several bent figures crossing the wreckage all over the mountain, leaving behind arched silhouettes as they passed by the fire. These should be the Raven Men. One Eye's mind was slightly touched. It was the knowledge he obtained from the Ramsey Monster Manual distributed by the Chamber of Commerce. He carefully moved closer to Crooked Mouth, hoping to secretly drag his brother into the darkness and not be discovered by the monsters. However, his hopes were dashed. Some noises came from behind him. Perhaps it was a broken twig, or a foot stepping on a small hole covered by fallen leaves, or a leather armor getting caught in a bush. Regardless, Cyclops immediately realized that there was someone else here. He immediately turned around and saw a humanoid creature with yellow eyes and a body covered in leather straps and armor. The guy held a torch in his hand, and his beak-like facial features looked even more terrifying under the illumination of the flame. In his other hand, he held a spear that was decorated with a string of small white objects. Similar to the bad taste of some bandits, they like to slaughter and collect the ears of their victims, One-Eyed thought to himself. The monster pointed its spear at him, and let out a battle cry that sounded like the cry of an old crow. However, his roar was interrupted. The newly promoted black-robed mage softly chanted an incantation, raised his hand, and shot an energy arrow at the monster's abdomen. The monster then bowed and fell, and the roaring stopped abruptly. However, the monster had already sent out a warning to the other members of its team. War cries rang out in response. 2-4, as many as 12.5 monsters were approaching One-Eye's position together. What was worse was that they did not seem to have to take the usual route. With the sharp claws on their hands and feet, they could leap over roofs and vault over walls as if they were walking on flat ground. It would not take long for them to gather and climb up this small hill. One-Eyed did not know if he could deal with all the monsters here. If he killed 12.5, maybe 24 new reinforcements would appear. According to Ramsey's Monster Instruction Manual, these evil crowmen were hatched by the leader of the monsters. They were like leeks that could be harvested batch by batch. Because of their low cost, many of them would be sent out at once for every operation. Furthermore, Quess had given Cyclops and Crooked Mouth a mission. They had to quietly bury a beacon nearby to prepare for Snade to cast a spell to open a stable interplane teleportation gate. They could not leak this information. If Crooked Mouth was not lying on the ground, he would have already turned invisible and escaped. But now, he could only bite the bullet and take out his obsidian magic orb. He silently recalled various spells and tried to think of a way to kill all these monsters. Just as One-Eyed was preparing, more than 12 evil crowmen had already surrounded him in the middle. A burst of ear-piercing laughter was heard, and the dark brown-skinned monsters made way for another figure to stagger out. This monster's figure was slightly thinner than his kind, and his back was hunched. He was wearing a long robe, the color of which was like coagulated blood. There was a faint smell of rust, and it was not clear if it was really dyed by blood. He raised one hand, palm up, took out a dagger, and pierced his hand with the tip of the dagger. Red blood gathered in his hand with sharp nails. The monster in the long robe said a word that One-Eyed had never heard before. The sound pierced his eardrums, and the pool of blood in his hand instantly burned. "Human, you want to play?" The monster said in broken Ramsey human language. "You want to play spells? I can play with you to the end." Back off immediately, One-Eyed narrowed his eyes. If there was someone familiar with him here, they would know that this cunning guy was definitely lying. Otherwise, I will pull out your intestines and stuff them into your beaks. It sounded like he was trying to sound tough, but in fact, One-Eyed wanted to numb the other party. He had already constructed the spell model of the acid arrow, and with enough obsidian magic orbs, he could release 6 acid arrows at once, killing half a dozen monsters at once. "Don't stand so far away, come closer," One-Eyed silently hoped in his heart. The monster in the long robe took a step closer. Suddenly, the 2 monsters on his right screamed and their bodies burst into flames. It happened so fast that everyone was stunned, even One-Eyed was a little surprised. Holding the burning blood, the Raven Man shaman cast a Dispel Fire spell on his 2 burning companions. He wanted to expel the fire elements from their bodies. However, at the same time, the other two monsters also burst into flames like withered branches. Crooked Mouth stood there, where the monsters were originally. He held a long sword made of obsidian in his hand, which was surrounded by a large flame. He looked a little embarrassed now, but he was calm and composed. Crooked Mouth smiled at the shaman and said, "My brother said that if you don't back off, you will die. You should listen to his orders." Damn it! The shaman's cursing was interrupted. There was a big hole in his chest, and around the wound, there was a sizzling sound of flesh and blood being corroded by strong acid. The one-eyed man's voice came from behind him. "You should also listen to me. Yesterday, I told you not to chat with the ladies on the street all night. Today, you won't fall off the flying carpet because you dozed off." Crooked Mouth immediately begged for mercy. Chapter 731. One Eye and Crooked Mouth have already buried the last beacon, Brock said as he walked into Snade's laboratory. "Wait a moment," the steampunk Demolic replied. At this moment, he was observing his latest experimental subject with his large lens eyes. The Demolica's mechanical fingers were covered with small pointed finger gloves with hair-thin needles. He was adjusting something that looked like a mechanical wasp, which would flutter its transparent wings made of gold foil when it was poked by a needle. "I'm almost done." Snade was still making the final adjustments. His fingers seemed to be dancing in a strange dance as the needles accurately pierced in and out of the device. "This is a relay construct, made from a design blueprint given to me by Shay. With their help, the interplanar portal I'm about to construct can be distributed." After 1/3 of an hourglass, the Demolic finally finished the work at hand. The mechanical wasp, which had just been adjusted, finally took flight smoothly. Together with hundreds of similar relay constructs, it flew out of the laboratory through the door. For ordinary spellcasters, spending 3 days and nights to assemble these constructs would definitely exhaust their energy. However, this level of work intensity was not a burden for the Demolic at all. After finishing, he was still full of energy. He took out 2 pencils and listed a few spells that he was about to use on a piece of paper. These were all new spells that Snade had invented on the spot just for this specific moment. Then, he melted a piece of squid ink and attached a metal tip to the pencils. He dipped the pencils in the ink and transcribed the spells that he had deliberated over. Changing a spell to use it for another purpose was not as simple as changing a certain word or gesture. The spellcaster had to have a very deep understanding of the principles of the spell. They had to know what it revealed and how it revealed it. If one casually changed a gesture or removed an incense, the spell would usually fail miserably and the magic power would dissipate. However, generally speaking, the failure of the spell would not cause any serious consequences, other than making the spellcaster feel frustrated. Of course, there were exceptions. Sometimes, a failed spell would fail in a very exaggerated way. This meant that although the result of the spell was not what the spellcaster wanted, the spell had indeed produced an effect, and it was even very close to the final result. The spell was trying to fix some mistakes that were difficult to find, trying to make things happen. Therefore, the more accomplished a master was in the field of arcane magic, the more he would think twice before trying a new spell. This was because if those half-baked mages failed, they would at most blow up their palms and destroy their brains. However, if there was a problem with their spell, they could destroy a city, a country, or even worse. "There should be no problem," he said to Brock, who was waiting at the side. Because the desert elf was also a sound warlock, he understood how complicated the preparations were before a mage could cast a spell. Thus, he was not impatient and appeared to be very patient. Snade took the paper in his hand and silently memorized the modified spell on it. This spell not only retained the basic framework of the interplanar portal, but also added a sub-factor to it, allowing it to open a portal to another world near the controlled repeater structure. This ensured that the portals in the island worlds would not interfere with each other. Due to the powerful logistical ability of the scale of perpetual order, although Snade's laboratory was built in a relatively barren area, he had a very complete set of spellcasting materials in his storage room, including a whole cabinet of spices and herbs for spellcasting, as well as all kinds of precious gems. The Demolic picked out an amethyst and drew the outline of a magic array on the experiment table. Then, he filled it with charging powder crystals, and then used a rune pen that could pull out metal threads to draw runes one by one. The spell took shape in his mind, turning into a warm ball of energy. He could feel it condensing in his body, and the surface of the ball was rippling with multicolored waves. This was the core of the spell. The spellcaster would usually quickly release it and let it change reality to what he wanted. However, Snade did not do that. He added the attributes he wanted to the spell core and let it find the location pointed out by the beacons and repeaters. In response, the buzzing sound emitted by the ball suddenly became louder, waiting for him to release and command. "Open the door," the Demolic said. "Open the gate that connects the island world and Ramsey." With a sound like an eggshell breaking, the spell core was released from his body and penetrated into the real world, beginning to carry out the spellcaster's orders. A gust of air surged. Snade stared at the magic array on the experiment table, and all the runes shone. Several repeater structures transmitted magic waves one after another, and the portal to another world was successfully opened. Several repeater structures opened the gate, and on the other side was a vast white world. The cold wind passed through the interplanar portal, leaving a thick and solid blanket of snow in front of the gate. This was the gate that connected the various polar bear tribes of the island world to the recruitment centers. On the other side of the repeater structures, there was a dense forest, and under the dark green evergreen trees stood an army of camels in square formations. There was no doubt that this was the portal to another world that connected to the original Camel Empire. Snade nodded, but when he cast his attention to the last repeater, the two exhaust pipes behind the steampunk Demolic spewed out a few clouds of steam. I seem to have opened the wrong gate. On the other side of the portal, salty seawater gushed out like a geyser, and an evil darkness appeared on the mirror-like portal. Through the control of the spell, Snade saw the scene on the other side of the portal. There were all kinds of creatures, some with animal heads, some with burning eyes, and some with the limbs of manta rays, octopuses, and large crustaceans. These strange creatures were all chanting together, and in the middle of them was a demonic fish with 7 pairs of gills. It turned out that Snade had accidentally connected to a portal in the demonic fish empire deep in the ocean of the island world. In order to make up for his mistake, the Demolic raised an arm and chanted a short and clear spell, and lightning suddenly jumped on his fingertips. This was not the kind of evoking lightning that ordinary mages could release. Even the fiercest thunder in the summer storm could not compete with it. This was a bolt of lightning that originated from the elements themselves. It leaped out of Snade's fingertips and quickly drilled out of his laboratory. It split the cold air and instantly hit the repeater structure that had opened the wrong gate. When the magic energy cut through the air itself was broken into the most basic element. Where the lightning passed, the air became pungent and bitter, and the air rolled and filled the space that was temporarily occupied by the lightning. A strong light and a metallic sound appeared on the other side of the portal, blowing up the undersea monster that was still performing the ritual. Chapter 732. The lightning struck Topulo, a demonic fish celebrating his 30,000th birthday, a member of the Seven Gills Council, the legal ruler of the Ocean of Wrath, and the protector of the old residents of the sea and the demonic fish monsters, and he was sent flying, leaving behind a white line in the sea like a hot coal. All the monsters present widened their eyes, if any, and looked at their master who had been struck by lightning in horror. The shock made them shrink back together, but that only lasted for a moment. The tallest among them, the devil fish, roared. Its voice sounded like a broken bell in a fish tank. Then, half of the monsters flopped in the sea and swam to the location of the portal. The other monsters with the innate spellcasting ability all took off their reef staffs and cast spells at the otherworld gate that had suddenly appeared. Topulo regained his composure. At first, he was frozen and did not move. When all the lightning in his body dissipated, he roared. His bare chest was covered with complicated scars. One of his eye sockets was empty and had lost his eyeballs, while the other eye was burning with anger. No matter who you are, I will imprison your soul in the depths of the sea abyss for 10,000 years. 4 long tentacles kept wriggling from both sides of the three-eyed monster fish. His green body was covered with transparent mucus, shining brightly. A large number of bubbles wrapped in magic runes, like bees returning to their hive, rushed to the otherworld gate not far away. There seems to be a problem. The gate can't be closed, said Snade, who was standing in the laboratory. His emotions did not fluctuate at all. Keyes had also come here because he had noticed the abnormality here. Through a remote viewing spell, he saw that the underwater monsters living in the island world were pouring into the Ramsey Plain. Switch the position of the gate and cause trouble for the Emperor's army. They have been living too smoothly recently, so I can spare some time to settle my soldiers. Hearing this suggestion, Snade, who was as black-hearted as his employer, nodded. He raised his palm and swiped it toward the sky. Half of the monsters near the portal turned into glass, and were knocked down from the sky together with the rest of the monsters. The monsters that had turned into glass fell to the ground and shattered into dust. The ones that were still alive crashed heavily onto the ground. Less than 10 of them could stand up. Snader clenched his left fist and knocked on his right palm. 2 of the monsters immediately began to melt. Their flesh and blood peeled off from their bones. They screamed and fell to the ground, until the melting flesh and blood blocked their rotting throat. 6 left. Snader stretched out his hands, and the limbs of those monsters were pulled off from their torsos by invisible hands. Then an explosion occurred. They didn't even have the chance to scream before they turned into swarms of mosquitoes, flies and wasps flying into the forest. First, we have to deal with those who saw the original location, the Demolic explained to Keyes, and then focused on modifying the runes on the magic array. He gently plucked out a rune, and then used a rune pen to repair it. Finally, he placed it back into the magic array. The position adjustment is complete. In this way, a portal that shouldn't have appeared in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the end, a result that was very right for Keyes was achieved. The Emperor was a hidden danger in the world of Ramsey, and the demonic fish was a hidden danger in the world of islands that he controlled. It's best if they die together, Keyes thought to himself. But it seems that something is missing. I have to create more conflicts for them. That way the fight will be more exciting. The Hound Trainer didn't say anything. He just looked out at the gradually darkening sky. Somewhere on the horizon, a group of blazing shadow beasts seemed to be sucked in by something. Clouds of white smoke rose from that direction, changing the color of the sky at this time, as if it was a false dawn. The low clouds refracted flashes of light from time to time, accompanied by the roars of beasts, like distant thunder. Night fell, and the chill grew longer. A group of raven men were chewing the dry food made up of boiled maple syrup, broken dried fruits, and smoked rat meat. They were trudging forward with difficulty. In order to keep warm, they had to wrap some cotton cloth around their claws, but after being soaked in salt water, their feet had become numb from the cold. The wind was getting stronger and stronger, like a dagger, piercing the thick fur of the raven men. They shivered and struggled to move forward, just because the Tribulation General ordered them to come and find out what happened here. At this time, the blood on the muddy ground was no longer steaming. The red blood stains suddenly disappeared after passing through the flat ground that seemed to have been swept by the wind. Something dragged the body here, and then The leader of the Raven Men stuffed his last piece of dry food into his mouth and grabbed another piece from a fellow Raven Man next to him. Finished it. The leader was angry but did not dare to say anything. The society of the Raven Men had always been like this. The strong had the power to wantonly deprive the weak. He chewed the food in big mouthfuls, making a crunch sound. The leader still wanted to say something, but he suddenly became alert and swallowed all the food with a gulp. "Be careful, I smell a creature." He picked up his spear again, covered half of his body with his shield, and carefully looked around for possible enemies. At this moment, he suddenly felt something grabbing his ankle. Without much time to think, the Raven Man captain immediately jumped up with all his might. He even used his clawed feet to stomp down, trying to get out of this crisis. However, not all of the Raven Men were as agile as him. Almost half of the Raven Men in a team of 10 were hit by the attack. They were knocked to the ground by the monsters that suddenly crawled out of the mud. Then, their bodies were pierced by the spiked claws, similar to the Raven Men's, or by the 3 hollow tongues that shot out from the monsters' faces. All in all, half of the Raven Men in the team instantly lost the ability to fight. The captain of the Raven Men stared nervously at the group of ugly monsters, although this was how the Ramsey people usually addressed them. But he had to admit that in terms of appearance alone, the Raven Men were absolutely dwarfed by the faceless lurkers. The leather-like, two-legged creature had no facial features, and its body was covered with weird and creepy whirlpools and gaps. It was worth mentioning that although the faceless lurkers looked like walking corpses, they were definitely not low in intelligence. As one of the many creations of the demonic fish, they were created to blend into the air-breathing races on the land, to engage in espionage and intelligence gathering. After 10 minutes of pain, for the faceless lurkers, the transformation was very painful. They could complete the reconstruction of their skin and twist their rubbery body to obtain a new appearance. This kind of disguise was so good that it could almost be passed off as the real thing. The only situation where they could be exposed was when they were eating. Even in the shape of a creature with a mouth, the faceless lurkers could not eat solid food. They could only survive on liquids, including the blood of the victims, and the tool for eating was their tongue. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.